Welcome back, legends. You're at Omni Wizard. Another incredible story awaits. What if Harry Potter was an Omega-level mutant and Professor X took him from the Dursleys? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1. The boy who was seen the first time Charles Xavier found Harry Potter, he wasn't looking for him. He was looking for a girl in Gdansk whose newly manifested electrokinesis had shorted out an entire city block, and a 15-year-old in Sao Paulo who'd been reported to the Brazilian government as a weather anomaly. Cerebro was having a productive Tuesday. The machine hummed around him in its great dome of steel and psychic amplification, and Charles sat at its center the way he always did, very still, breathing slowly, letting his mind expand outward like ink dropped in water. He found the girl in Gdansk. He flagged the boy in Sao Paulo. He made a note about a young woman in Nairobi whose empathic abilities were developing at an extraordinary rate, and he was just beginning to pull his consciousness back toward his own skull when something snagged him. That was the only word for it. Snagged, like walking through a dark room and catching your sleeve on a nail you didn't know was there. Charles stopped. He redirected. He pushed his awareness carefully toward Surrey, England, toward a street so relentlessly ordinary it practically radiated its own ambition toward normalcy, and then he felt it, a mind burning like a small sun behind a locked door. He sat with it for a moment, just breathing. In 30 years of using Cerebro, he had encountered perhaps a dozen Omega-level signatures. Jean's had felt like standing at the edge of the ocean in a storm. Eric's had been geometrically precise, almost architectural, the mind of a man who had learned to impose order on a universe that had shown him only chaos. This was neither of those things. This felt like the first 5 seconds after lightning strikes. All that ozone and silence and the sense that the air itself hadn't decided yet what it was going to do next. And underneath it, underneath the raw, staggering psychic wattage, Charles felt the shape of a child. A small boy who was cold and confused and quietly, devastatingly certain that this was simply what life was. Charles pulled the helmet off. He sat in the silence of the Cerebro chamber for a long moment. Then he went to find the jet. Logan was in the garage when Charles found him, which meant he was either fixing something or pretending to fix something, while actually thinking about a problem he didn't want to discuss. The motorcycle he was working on had been perfectly functional for 2 weeks. Charles had decided not to mention this. "I need you to come with me to Surrey," Charles said. Logan looked up from the engine with an expression that communicated quite efficiently that Surrey was not a destination he'd been hoping to visit that day. "England? It's a short flight." "That's not what I asked." Charles paused in the doorway. "I found something on Cerebro, a child. The signature is," he considered how to say it, "I've never seen anything like it, Logan, and I've been doing this for a very long time." Logan put down the wrench. That more than anything told Charles he'd made the right choice in who to bring. "How old?" Logan asked. "The mind feels young, very young, 8, perhaps 9. I can't be more precise without a closer reading." "And why Surrey specifically?" "Number 4, Privet Drive." Charles moved into the garage and lowered himself into the chair he kept there. He and Logan spent more time in this garage than was probably professionally appropriate, and accommodations had been made. "The address is registered to a Vernon and Petunia Dursley. I ran it while the jet was prepping. No flags, no history, nothing unusual, completely ordinary people." Logan made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Completely ordinary people," he repeated, "and there's a kid there with an Omega signature." "Yes, and you want to go check on him?" "I want to go meet him," Charles said carefully, "and yes, I want to make sure he's all right." Logan picked up his jacket from the workbench. "Let's go." They landed the cloaked jet in the park 3 streets over at just past 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in July, which meant Privet Drive was in the particular state of suburban paralysis that descends on English neighborhoods when school is out, and the weather is merely adequate rather than good. A few kids were riding bikes. A woman in a yellow sundress was deadheading roses with the focused aggression of someone working through a difficult emotion. A man 2 doors down was washing a car he'd almost certainly washed last weekend. Number 4 looked exactly like number 3 and number 5, and to be honest, every other house on the street. Pebble Dash exterior. Neat garden. A car on the drive that was just slightly nicer than the neighbors' cars, in the way that suggested the gap mattered very much to someone. Charles and Logan walked up the front path. Logan kept his hands in his jacket pockets. Charles knocked. The door was opened by a woman with a long neck and an expression of such immediate, instinctive suspicion that it would have been impressive if it weren't so exhausting to witness. She looked at Charles, she looked at Logan, she looked at the wheelchair. "Whatever you're selling," she said, "we don't want any." "We're not selling anything, Mrs. Dursley," Charles said pleasantly. "My name is Charles Xavier. This is my colleague, Mr. Logan. I was hoping we might have a word." The name didn't register. That was interesting, Charles thought. He'd half expected it might, though he couldn't have said why. Petunia Dursley's mind was not subtle. Moved in straight, anxious lines, most of them circling back to what the neighbors would think. About what? She asked. About the boy who lives here, Charles said. Harry Potter. The change was immediate and unambiguous. Her face went first to something that might have been fear and then almost instantly to something harder and more practiced. She started to close the door. Logan's hand came up and held it open without any particular effort. "We'll just take a moment of your time," Charles said. His voice didn't change at all. The sitting room of number 4 Privet Drive looked like a catalog for people who wanted their home to announce, from every available surface, that they were doing very well, thank you. There were photographs on every wall and surface. A fat, blonde boy at various ages, grinning at the camera with the absolute confidence of someone who has never once been told that they were anything other than wonderful. There was not a single photograph that contained a dark-haired child. Charles noticed this before he'd been in the room 10 seconds. He suspected Logan noticed it too. Vernon Dursley arrived from what appeared to be the direction of the kitchen, still holding a newspaper and wearing the expression of a man who had decided preemptively to be outraged. He was enormous in the way that suggested he'd been solidly built once and had gradually decided to express that fact more expansively. His mustache was doing a significant amount of emotional work. "What's this then?" he demanded, looking at Logan with the bravado of a man who had never in his life actually been in a situation where that bravado would need to prove itself. Logan looked back at him. The bravado did not survive the contact. "We were just telling your wife," Charles said, "that we'd like to speak with Harry." "Harry?" Vernon said the name the way you'd say the name of a persistent mold problem. "What do you want with Harry?" "That's between us and Harry," Charles said. "If you could let him know we're here." "He's in the garden," Petunia said quickly in the tone of someone trying to get the conversation to a more manageable place. "Petunia," Vernon started. "The garden," Charles said. "Thank you." He turned his chair toward the back of the house. Logan followed. Neither of them waited to be led. The garden was all Vernon's, in the sense that it was obsessively maintained in a way that spoke to genuine pride and absolutely no imagination. Straight rows of begonias, borders that had clearly been measured with an actual measuring tape, a lawn of such uniform greenness it looked slightly unreal. There was a garden shed at the back and beside it a small strip of earth that had been allowed to grow with considerably less care than everything else. A concession, Charles suspected, rather than a deliberate choice. A boy was sitting cross-legged on the grass beside this strip of earth, which had a few struggling bean plants and what might have been an attempt at lettuce. He was small for his age, which Charles had expected. He was wearing clothes roughly 3 sizes too large, which Charles had not expected and which settled something cold and deliberate in his chest. The boy was talking very quietly to one of the bean plants. He looked up when Charles came around the corner of the house and Charles saw his face for the first time. The scar was exactly where it should have been, a jagged lightning bolt above the boy's right eyebrow, slightly raised and silvery pink. His eyes were green, the kind of green that you had to look at twice because the color seemed genuinely improbable, like someone had reached into the concept of green and pulled out the most concentrated version. He was wearing glasses that were slightly too large for his face, one arm repaired with what appeared to be a piece of Scotch tape. He looked at Charles, he looked at Logan, he didn't seem frightened. "Hello," he said. "Hello," Charles said. "Harry?" "Yes." The boy uncrossed his legs and stood up, with the careful economy of movement that Charles associated with children who had learned not to take up too much space. "I heard you knock. I figured it was someone for Uncle Vernon." "We're actually here to see you," Charles said. Harry processed this. He didn't look suspicious exactly. He looked like someone doing a very fast and very private calculation. "Why?" Charles looked at him steadily. The boy's mind, even at this proximity, was extraordinary. It pressed against Charles's awareness the way a fire pressed against a fireplace screen, not violently but with a kind of patient, constant insistence. There was something else there too. A thread, dark and cold and intrusive, wound through the architecture of Harry's thoughts like a wire someone had soldered in without his knowledge or consent. Charles had seen something like it once before and hoped never to see it again. He kept his expression level and his voice warm. "We're here because you're special, Harry, and I mean that in a very specific, very literal sense." "Everybody's special," Harry said with the flat delivery of a child repeating something he'd heard said in a context where it wasn't meant to apply to him. Logan made a short sound. It might have been a laugh. "Yeah, that's usually what people say," he said. "But Chuck means actually special, like in a way that's measurable." Harry looked at Logan. "Are you American, Canadian?" "Oh," Harry seemed to find this mildly interesting. He looked back at Charles. "What kind of special?" "You're a mutant," Charles said. "Do you know what that means?" The boy thought about it. His mind did something extraordinary while he was thinking. It reached briefly and unconsciously, and Charles felt it brush against his own telepathy the way you feel a warm draft under a door. Harry had no idea he'd done it. I've heard the word, Harry said carefully. People say it on the news sometimes. Is it true you can move things with your mind? Some of us can, Charles said. Yes. I can do that, Harry said, and then he stopped as if he'd surprised himself. Logan's eyes cut briefly to Charles. Charles kept his face completely still. Can you? Charles said. Harry looked at the bean plant beside him. He looked at it for about 2 seconds in a considering sort of way. Then one of the struggling plants unwound itself from where it had been leaning against its stake, rose about 6 inches straight up into the air, just the plant, root and all, rotated once slowly and settled itself back into the earth in a slightly different position, with its leaves now tilted toward the afternoon sun. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. Harry didn't move his hands. He didn't close his eyes or furrow his brow. He looked completely, utterly unbothered by the fact that he'd just moved a living plant telekinetically with the casual ease most people reserved for reaching for a cup of tea. I do it to the plants sometimes, Harry said, because they grow better if they get enough sun. The dirt's not great on this side. Charles looked at the bean plant, then he looked at Harry. That's very thoughtful, he said, and he meant it completely. What else can you do? Logan asked. His voice was perfectly level, but Charles could read the thing underneath it, not alarm exactly, recognition. Harry seemed to weigh whether to answer. Then with the slight shrug of someone who has decided to be honest because the social calculus favors it. Things come to me when I want them, like if I need something and I concentrate it sort of arrives and I can hear things. He paused, not with my ears. What kind of things? Charles asked. People's feelings mostly, sometimes words if they're thinking them very loudly. He looked at Charles with an expression of sudden assessing interest. You know what I mean, don't you? I do, Charles said. Because I can do the same thing, that's called telepathy. Harry nodded slowly. He didn't look amazed. Looked, Charles thought, like someone who has just been given the word for something they've been carrying around nameless for years and is experiencing the relief of that and trying not to show how significant the relief is. Uncle Vernon says I'm a freak, Harry said. His voice was completely even, no performance, no bid for sympathy, just a fact he was offering in the spirit of completeness. When things happen, Logan's jaw tightened. Charles noted it and filed it. Your uncle is wrong, Charles said. In a very straightforward, factual sense. What you are is extraordinarily rare, and it is not freakishness. And I want to be precise here, Harry, because I think you deserve precision. It is one of the most remarkable things I have ever encountered, and I have been encountering remarkable things for a very long time. Harry looked at him for a moment, then he looked down at the bean plants. How did you find me? I have a machine, Charles said. It amplifies my telepathy and lets me scan for other people like us. I found your mind while I was scanning. I want to be honest with you about that. That's a bit invasive, Harry said. Charles felt something in his chest loosen slightly. It is, he agreed. I'm sorry. I only hold the broad strokes of a mind when I scan. I wasn't reading your thoughts, but you're right and I should acknowledge that. Harry nodded, apparently satisfied. He looked at Logan. Are you a mutant too? Yeah, Logan said. What can you do? Logan was quiet for a second. Then he held up his right hand and the 3 claws came out between his knuckles, smooth, bright, absolutely lethal, catching the afternoon light. Harry stared at them. His expression went through several things very quickly, ending somewhere in the vicinity of deeply interested. He said, Does it hurt when they come out? Every time, Logan said, but you do it anyway. Yeah, Harry thought about this. That's brave, he said, simply and without sentimentality, and then looked back at Charles. What do you want? I don't mean that rudely. I mean you came all the way from wherever you came from. What do you want to happen? The directness of it was startling, even for Charles. This was not a child who had been taught that his wants and thoughts mattered, that would have produced either false modesty or defiance. This was a child who had simply learned, through years of quiet observation, to cut straight to the functional core of a situation because the emotional layers were generally not safe to engage with. I run a school, Charles said, in New York. It's for people like us, people with abilities that the world doesn't fully understand yet. The students there learn to understand their powers. They learn things like mathematics and history and literature. They learn to exist in the world without fear and without hiding. He paused. I would very much like for you to come and be a student there. Harry was quiet for what felt like a long time. Behind him, the bean plant he'd repositioned was already visibly orienting itself more aggressively toward the sun. Charles hadn't mentioned it. Is it a real school? Harry asked. Like with other kids? Very much so, children and teenagers of all ages, some of them are your age. Do I have a choice? Harry asked. Or is this the kind of offer that isn't really an offer? Logan looked at Charles. Charles looked at Harry. You always have a choice, Charles said. I mean that absolutely. If you tell me right now that you would prefer to stay here, I will leave you my number, I will check in with you, and I will respect your decision. But you don't want me to stay here, Harry said. You think I should come. I think, Charles said carefully, that you are the most powerful young mutant I have ever encountered, and you are currently being kept in conditions that are, he stopped. He chose honesty. Unacceptable, Harry, they are unacceptable. You are sleeping in a cupboard. Harry froze. The air around him did something. Charles felt it rather than saw it, a kind of psychic pressure that came and went in under a second like a held breath. How do you know that? When I found your mind on Cerebro, I got impressions along with the signal, very broad ones, but some things are clear. Harry looked at him for a long moment. His expression was doing something complicated and private that Charles made no attempt to read. Then he said quietly, "It's got a light now. Uncle Vernon put a light in last year." He said it without any inflection whatsoever. The simple fact of a light bulb in a cupboard offered as evidence that things were not so bad. Something moved in Charles's chest that had nothing to do with his mutation. "Come with us," Logan said. His voice was rough and completely unambiguous. "Seriously, kid, come with us." Harry looked at him, then he looked at the garden, at the bean plants he'd been tending with his strange, quiet care, and then back at Charles. And then he said, "Can I get my things?" "Of course," Charles said. "Take as long as you need." "I won't be long," Harry said. "I don't have very much." He said that one without any inflection either. He went back into the house. What happened next took approximately 11 minutes. In the first 2 minutes, Vernon Dursley came out into the garden and explained at some length and at rising volume that Harry was staying where he was, that he didn't know who these people thought they were, and that he was this close to calling the police. He got through most of this before he looked at Logan's eyes and found the experience sufficiently clarifying to stop. "I want to be transparent with you," Charles said during the brief silence that followed. "Legally, my solicitor will have paperwork for you to sign within 24 hours. Harry will be enrolling in my school as a full-time residential student. His school fees, his care, his everything will be my responsibility. You will not be required to do anything further." Vernon stared at him. "You can't just take someone else's." "I'm not taking anyone," Charles said. "Harry has chosen to come. He is 8 years old, and yes, there are legal processes, and yes, they will be followed, and yes, you will be represented in those processes if you'd like to contest them. But I would encourage you to consider very carefully whether that is the path you want to take." He said it pleasantly. He did not technically imply anything. But Petunia, who was watching from the kitchen window, was already nodding in the small, tight way of someone who has made a decision and is mainly relieved to have made it. "He's not normal," Vernon said. His voice had lost most of its volume. "You understand that. He's not the things he does." "I understand perfectly," Charles said, "which is why he's coming with me and why you'll find that this is the best possible outcome for all concerned." Vernon looked at him for another moment. Then he went back inside. The kitchen window curtain dropped. Logan had not said a single word through any of this. He just stood there with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets. And that, Charles thought, had probably been the most effective contribution either of them had made. Harry came back out of the house 7 minutes later with a pillowcase containing a few items of clothing, a broken toy soldier, and a library book that had clearly been read many times. He had changed into a slightly smaller t-shirt, still large but less dramatically so, and he'd combed his hair, which had made absolutely no difference whatsoever to its fundamental architecture. He stopped in front of Charles and Logan and looked at them both very steadily. He had the library book tucked under one arm. "I told them I was going," he said. "Aunt Petunia told me to send word if I needed anything." He paused. "I don't think she meant it, but she said it." "She'll come around," Charles said, because it was what he hoped rather than what he knew. Harry nodded once as though filing this as useful data. Then he said, "Where exactly is the school?" "Westchester County, New York." "New York," Harry said. His voice lifted just slightly, the first undisguised expression of feeling Charles had heard from him. "I've never been anywhere." "Well," Charles said. He turned his chair toward the gate. "That's about to change rather dramatically." They were over the Atlantic when Harry fell asleep. He'd spent the first hour of the flight with his face pressed to the jet's small window, watching England compress into a patchwork of greens and grays and disappear under cloud cover. He asked careful, intelligent questions. How does the cloaking work? Does the fuel last long enough? What's the cruising altitude? And Logan answered most of them with the patience of a man who was, without admitting it, charmed. Charles sat across from them and mostly listened and let himself slowly begin to process the magnitude of what he'd done. He had taken a child from his legal guardians on a Wednesday afternoon because a machine had found the child's mind and he hadn't been able to leave the boy in that garden. This was not standard procedure. Truthfully, there was no standard procedure for this because he'd never found a mind like Harry's on Cerebro, and he suspected, with a certainty he didn't entirely like, that he wasn't going to find another one. When Harry's questions slowed and his breathing evened out and his forehead came to rest against the cool wall of the jet, Charles let himself look carefully at the boy's sleeping mind. It was immense. That was the first thing, the thing that defied easy metaphor, the sheer scope of it, the sense that he was looking at something that extended well past the dimensions that a mind was supposed to occupy. Harry was 8 years old and his psychic profile was already orders of magnitude beyond anything that should have been developmentally possible. But that was almost the smaller concern. The thread was there, the dark, cold, intrusive thing Charles had sensed in the garden. In sleep, with Harry's active consciousness not running interference, Charles could see it more clearly. It was not natural, it was grafted, sutured into the architecture of Harry's mind at a point so early that it had grown into him the way scar tissue grows, becoming load-bearing in ways that made removal terrifyingly complex. It pulsed with something that was almost like a heartbeat, not Harry's heartbeat, someone else's. Charles had encountered fragmented psychic consciousness before, the result of trauma, of extreme injury, of things done to the human mind by people who had no business doing them. He'd never felt it nested inside a child. He pulled back. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and looked at Harry's sleeping face, the impossible scar, the absurd hair, the library book still tucked under his arm, and felt something shift in his understanding of what the next several years of his life were going to look like. Logan appeared from the cockpit. He looked at Harry. He looked at Charles. He sat down in the seat across the narrow aisle and kept his voice very low. "What aren't you telling me?" "A great many things," Charles said. "But most of them I don't fully understand yet. The scar..." "Yes," Logan was quiet for a moment. "I've seen a lot of people with scars. His is..." He stopped. "Wrong," Charles agreed. "In a very specific sense, there's a psychic component to it that I've never encountered before. Someone put something in him, Logan. Through that wound, whether deliberately or as a side effect of whatever caused it, there is a fragment of another consciousness lodged in his mind." Logan looked at Harry. His expression was very still in the way it got when he was processing something he wanted to respond to with his claws and was making the active choice not to. "Is it dangerous?" "I don't know yet. It's dormant, I think, at the moment. And he's been living with it his entire life without harm, which suggests some kind of equilibrium. But the reason I found him on Cerebro," Charles hesitated, "the signal was so powerful partly because of his own mind, which is extraordinary, but it was also amplified by that fragment as if both signals were resonating off each other. Two frequencies in the same box," Logan said. "Something like that." They both looked at the boy. He slept with complete stillness, the way children do when they're genuinely exhausted down to the bone. No restlessness, no adjusting, just the clean unconsciousness of a body that had decided to take the opportunity and was not going to waste it. "We're keeping him," Logan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Charles said. "Whatever comes of it, and I suspect quite a lot will, we are absolutely keeping him." Logan nodded. He leaned back in his seat. "Good," he said, and closed his eyes. They landed at the estate at 10:30 in the evening, and the school was mostly quiet. Several of the older students were still in the common room, and Scott was working late in the training room. Because Scott always worked late in the training room, and Aurora was doing something with her plants in the greenhouse that she would later describe as maintenance, but which Charles privately categorized as meditation. Harry stepped off the jet and stood on the grass of the back lawn and looked up at the mansion and said nothing for a full minute. The mansion was illuminated from several of its windows, warm light falling in rectangles on the lawn, and it rose against the night sky with the comfortable authority of a building that had been absolutely certain of its own impressiveness for about 200 years. It was not showing off, it simply was. "This is the school," Harry said. "This is the school," Charles confirmed. "It's massive. It has 53 rooms as best I've been able to count. The number seems to vary depending on who's doing the counting." Harry looked at him. "Buildings don't change size." "Generally no," Charles agreed pleasantly. He moved toward the house. "You'll have your own room. Mrs. Hudson, she manages the household, will have made it up. Tomorrow we can talk about the academic program, the other students, the training facilities. Tonight, I'm fine," Harry said. "I don't need tonight," Charles continued. "You should eat something and sleep in a proper bed, in that order." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right." Logan walked beside him toward the mansion's side entrance. They went up the steps and through the door, and the house received them with warmth and light and the faint smell of old wood and something baking that was either very late dinner or very early breakfast, in the way of large households run by people who took cooking seriously. Just before they reached the corridor that led to the residential wing, Harry stopped. Charles turned his chair. In the near dark of the hallway, the boy's eyes caught the light and held it. "Professor Xavier," he said. "Yes. Why did you come yourself?" He said it with genuine curiosity, not accusation. "You found me on a machine. You could have sent someone. Why did you come?" Charles looked at him for a moment. "Because when I found your mind," he said, "I wanted to be sure you were real. Things that extraordinary, I have to see them for myself." Harry thought about this. Some private calculation happened behind his eyes. Then he said quietly, "No one ever came before." It was only 6 words. It held about 30 years of a child's life in it. I know, Charles said. I'm sorry it took this long. Harry nodded. He looked down the corridor, then back once more. Thank you, he said, and he meant it in the straightforward, whole way that children mean things when they haven't yet learned to soften or decorate sincerity. Come on, Logan said, and put a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. I'll find you something to eat. They went down the hall together, Logan's heavy boots quiet on the carpet, Harry's two large trainers completely silent, and Charles watched them go and thought, with something that was not quite premonition but was close enough to be uncomfortable, that the world had just changed and didn't know it yet. Somewhere in England, a very old man was sleeping in a school full of magic, and some fine-tuned, lifelong sense for the significance of events, would wake him in about 6 hours with the uneasy feeling that something important had moved without his knowledge or permission. In the garden of number 4, Privet Drive, 3 bean plants were slowly, very slowly turning their leaves toward a moon they couldn't see, following a directive embedded in them by a child who was now 3,000 miles away. And in a bedroom in a mansion in Westchester County, for the first time in his life, Harry Potter slept in a real bed, in a room with a door that locked from the inside and did not dream at all. Chapter 2, Westchester. Harry woke up at 5:30 in the morning because that was when he always woke up, and for 3 full seconds he had absolutely no idea where he was. The ceiling was wrong. Too high, too white, with a plaster medallion at its center and a light fitting that was actually decorative rather than purely functional. The bed was wrong, too soft, too wide, the pillow too thick. The light coming through the curtains was the particular blue-gray of very early morning, and there was birdsong outside the window, and the window was large enough that he could see actual sky through the gap in the curtains, which meant he was not in the cupboard under the stairs. He lay there for a moment and let the previous day reassemble itself in the correct order. The man in the wheelchair, the Canadian with the claws, the jet that could apparently become invisible. The building that might have 53 rooms or might have more, depending on who was doing the counting. Harry sat up. The room was not large by the standards of what he'd seen of the house, but by every standard he'd spent the last 8 years developing, it was extraordinary. There was a proper wardrobe, a desk with an actual lamp on it, a bookshelf with actual books, and through a half-open door he could see a bathroom that was his and only his. The clothes he'd arrived in were folded on the chair by the desk. Someone had washed them while he slept, which was either very kind or very disconcerting, and he decided to classify it as kind. He got up, used the bathroom, changed into his one other set of clothes, a pair of jeans that were close enough to his size to be comfortable and a t-shirt that had been someone else's before it was his, and went to look out the window. The grounds were enormous. Dawn was doing its slow business across a lawn that stretched a considerable distance before hitting a line of trees, and beyond one wing of the building he could see what appeared to be a track. The gardens were nothing like Aunt Petunia's geometrically anxious flower beds. These were the gardens of a place that had been growing long enough to be confident about it. Hedges and old trees and flower borders that were lush without being managed to within an inch of their lives. Harry pressed his hand flat to the glass and looked out and tried to calibrate the size of the thing he'd walked into. He was good at reading situations. He'd had to be. Vernon's moods, Dudley's intentions, the relative social temperature of any room he entered. He'd spent most of his life doing rapid, accurate assessments of people and places because the cost of getting it wrong was very immediate and very physical. What he'd read in Professor Xavier was genuine. What he'd read in Logan was gruff, but the kind of gruff that had warmth underneath it like a banked fire. What he'd read in this building in the hour before he fell asleep was something harder to name, something like purpose, like a place that knew what it was for. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with any of that. But he'd done the calculation the same way he did every calculation. What are the options? What are the costs? What is the likely outcome? Staying at Privet Drive, known quantity, known costs, no pathway to anything different. Going with the man in the wheelchair who'd looked at him with the particular expression of someone seeing the actual shape of a thing rather than its surface. Unknown quantity, unknown costs, but a pathway that was at minimum different. Different had seemed worth the risk. He was still standing at the window when he heard, from somewhere below, the sound of someone doing something very violent to something that was probably a punching bag, and the warm smell of coffee working its way up through the building. And he decided that standing in his room calibrating was probably not the most efficient use of his first morning. The kitchen was massive and well-stocked, and at 6 o'clock in the morning contained exactly one person, who was approximately 17 and had red hair and was standing at the counter eating toast and reading a magazine, and managed to look startled when Harry came in, which seemed like an unusual reaction for someone with superpowers. "Oh," she said. "Hi, you must be the new kid." Harry said. "Jean Grey. She put down the magazine and looked at him with frank curiosity and without any of the careful guardedness people usually used when meeting him, as if she decided immediately that social management was not required. Professor X told us last night that we'd be getting someone new. He didn't say much else, he never does. What did he say? That you were young, that you'd had a long day, and that anyone who woke you up before 7 would be having a conversation with him about respecting other people's recovery time. She paused. It was kind of an unusually specific warning. It's 6, Harry said. I woke myself up. He'll probably find that impressive. She nodded at the toaster. Do you want some? There's bread. Mrs. Hudson doesn't get in until 7, but she leaves everything out. Harry made toast. He found the butter without asking because he could feel the layout of the kitchen in a vague, peripheral way, the same instinct that pulled things toward him when he needed them, operating in reverse, orienting him toward things before he consciously looked. He sat down at the kitchen table across from Jean and she picked up her magazine and then immediately put it back down again. Okay, I'm not going to be able to concentrate, she said. What can you do? What? Harry said. Mutant ability, what is it? She said it the way you'd ask someone what their favorite subject was, casual, genuinely interested, not weighted. If that's okay to ask, Logan says I have no sense of conversational pacing, but I think I just prefer being direct. Logan seems to prefer being direct too, Harry said. Everyone in this house is direct, it's kind of a whole thing. Professor X is the most diplomatic person here, and even he will just look at you and say, Jean, I know what you're thinking and I'd like you to reconsider. She demonstrated, straightening up and delivering this in a very passable impression of composed authority, which is terrifying when you're new but actually quite efficient once you get used to it. Harry had eaten half a piece of toast before he registered that he was smiling. It was an unfamiliar sensation in a morning context. Telekinesis, he said, and I can hear things like what people are thinking if they're thinking it loudly enough. Jean's eyebrows went up. Telepathy? That's what I have, she said. Well, and telekinesis, both. She looked at him with an expression that had recalibrated into something more serious without losing its warmth. That's rare, like really rare. Professor X has both and I have both, and he says it's not impossible but it's close. And now me, Harry said, and now you. She studied him in a way that didn't feel intrusive, which was interesting because it was quite direct. Are yours strong? Harry thought about the bean plant. He thought about the jet, how he'd felt the structural components of it the way you feel the shape of a room in the dark, by the pressure of it against some sense he'd never had a name for. He thought about the moment in the hallway the previous night when he'd almost reached for Professor Xavier's thoughts without meaning to and had stopped himself. I don't know how to compare, he said honestly. Jean nodded. Fair, when I got here I didn't either. She picked up her toast. I've been here 3 years, it gets clearer, understanding what you've got. Professor X is good at that, at helping you see the actual shape of it. She paused. He'll probably want to run some tests. He'll call them assessments and make them sound very civilized, but basically it's tests. They're fine. What kind of tests? He'll show you things and ask you to interact with them. There's a training room, the danger room, Scott calls it, but Professor X disapproves of that name. You'll meet Scott. He's intense, don't be put off. He's actually decent once you've known him a while. She finished her toast. Are you starting to get overwhelmed? You don't look overwhelmed. I'm all right, Harry said. Most kids cried when they got here, she said. First morning at least, not because it's bad, it's actually really good, but because it's a lot after whatever came before. She said it without prurience, without probing, just acknowledging a likely shape of experience. I'll probably catch up, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Her mind did something not reaching, not intrusive, but Harry felt the edge of her telepathy like warmth from a nearby fire, and she felt him feel it, and something in her expression shifted into recognition. You felt that, she said. Yes, sorry, don't apologize. She leaned forward on her elbows. That's Harry, that range of passive awareness, that's something it took me 2 years of training to develop. She said it factually, not to impress him, working something out in real time. Professor X said you were something new. He said that. Last night to Scott and Aurora, I wasn't meant to hear it. She grinned briefly. Perk and hazard of the ability. He said this one is something genuinely new, and I want everyone to make him feel at home before we start figuring out what that means. Harry absorbed this. And you're telling me that because I think you deserve to know that the people here are already on your side, Jean said. And I thought you'd want to know before you spent the morning trying to figure out if that was true. She was, Harry thought, remarkably perceptive. Thank you, he said. Finish your toast, she said, and picked her magazine back up. I'll give you the tour at 7. Logan will probably show up before that and be gruff at you, which is also basically his version of welcoming someone. As if on cue, the kitchen door opened and Logan came in wearing a flannel shirt and the expression of a man who had been awake for some time and was approximately 60% of the way to needing coffee. He looked at Harry. He looked at the toast. He said, "Good. You're up?" Then he went to the coffee machine and started it without further comment. Jean caught Harry's eye and mouthed, "Told you." The tour took most of the morning. The mansion had, Jean informed him as they went, been a private residence before Xavier's grandfather acquired it, and then a Xavier family home for 2 generations, and then gradually and somewhat accidentally a school as Charles's own life went in unexpected directions. It had the particular quality of places that have absorbed many people's lives, rooms that had been repurposed but still remembered their original intent, corridors that turned at angles that no architect would choose but that felt inevitable once you were in them. There were, Jean confirmed, 13 other students currently in residence. The school had space for more, but Professor X was specific about his intake process, which Jean described as thorough in a way that suggested she had opinions about it but was choosing not to share them. Most of the current students were teenagers. Harry, at 8, was the youngest, which he already knew. He met Scott Summers in the training room corridor, a lean, dark-haired boy of about 15 wearing red-tinted glasses and the posture of someone who had decided to be in charge of his own spine at a very young age. Scott looked at Harry for a moment with those impenetrable lenses, said, "Xavier told us about you," in a tone that was not unwelcoming but was also not providing any easy way in, and then shook his hand. "You're young to be here," Scott said. "You sound like you disapprove," Harry said. "I don't disapprove, I'm calibrating a beat. Xavier's assessments are fair, do them honestly, don't hold back, that's the only advice worth giving." He looked at Jean. "You showing him the danger room?" "I was going to call it the training facility," Jean said. "It's the danger room," Scott said and walked off. "He grows on you," Jean said. "Like something does," Harry agreed, and Jean laughed, a real sudden laugh that seemed to surprise her slightly. Aurora Munro found them in the East Wing corridor. She was tall and white-haired in a way that was not age but simply was, and she moved with a quality that Harry's brain, reaching for a comparison, filed as weather. Something that had its own logic and didn't require anyone else's framework. She crouched down to his level with the easy athleticism of someone who didn't think twice about it and looked at him very directly. "You're Harry," she said. "Yes, I'm Aurora, I control weather, I've been here 5 years." She said it with the calm directness of someone who had decided that front-loading information was simply more efficient. "How are you finding it?" Big, Harry said. "In a good way." "It is big," she agreed. "It takes about 2 weeks before you stop getting slightly lost." "Don't let it bother you," she stood up. "If you need anything and the professor is busy, find me or Jean. Logan is also reliable, but he will pretend he isn't." "I heard that," Logan said, from somewhere around the corner, which should have been impossible because they were in a wing of the building Harry was fairly certain Logan hadn't been anywhere near. Harry filed this as something to investigate later. The assessment was in the afternoon. Professor X's study was a room lined with books that had clearly been read rather than displayed, with a large desk and several chairs and a window that looked onto the grounds. It felt like the room of a person, not the room of an institution. Charles was behind the desk when Harry came in, and there was a woman Harry hadn't met yet sitting in one of the chairs, compact, dark-eyed, with an expression of very controlled interest. "Harry," Charles said, "this is Dr. Maura MacTaggart. She's a geneticist and an old friend, and I've asked her to be part of today's conversation." "Hello," Harry said. He sat in the remaining chair. "Hello, Harry," Maura said. Her accent was Scottish. "I'm going to ask you some questions and take some simple readings. Nothing invasive. We just want to understand what we're working with." "All right," Harry said. "Before we start," Charles said, "I want to be clear, this is for your benefit as much as ours. Understanding your abilities specifically is the first step toward using them well rather than being used by them. You're not a case study, you're a student." "Jean said you'd call it an assessment," Harry said. "Not a test," Charles smiled. "Jean is perceptive." The assessment lasted about 2 hours. Maura asked questions about Harry's history, when he'd first noticed things happening, what kinds of things, whether they were connected to emotional states or happened independently. Harry answered honestly. He told her about things flying across rooms when he was angry. He told her about the hearing, knowing what the teacher was going to say before she said it, knowing when Dudley was about to come around a corner. He told her about the time 3 years ago when Dudley and his friends had cornered him on the school roof, and he'd been on the ground and then not on the ground, appearing on the chimney stack without understanding how, which had got him in enormous trouble because nobody had wanted to explain exactly how he'd managed it. Teleportation. Maura said, making a note. "I haven't been able to do it again," Harry said, "on purpose." "Fight or flight," Charles said. "Under sufficient stress, your mind found a solution it couldn't access in calm conditions. That's not unusual in early-stage mutations, especially powerful ones." "Am I powerful?" Harry asked. He was genuinely asking. Charles and Maura exchanged a look. "Yes," Charles said, "substantially. More than Jean." Another look. The honest answer, Charles said, is that I'm not sure the comparison is straightforward. Jean is extraordinary. You appear to be something that requires a slightly different framework than I've used before. That's not me being evasive, it's simply accurate. Harry nodded. Okay. He looked at the books on the nearest shelf. Can I try something? Of course, Charles said. Harry looked at the shelf, specifically at a book about 3 feet above his comfortable reaching height, Red Spine Principles of Genetics, 4th edition. He reached for it without moving his hands. It slid off the shelf and came across the room and settled into his hand, and then he reached back and it returned. He looked at Charles. That's not the impressive part, he said. I can feel the other books, all of them, their weight, their position. I can feel the desk and the chairs and the room. He pressed his lips together, working out how to say it. It's like the room is part of me if I let it be. Mora wrote something down. She wrote it very quickly. Spatial and material awareness at a high level, Charles said. Proprioception extended beyond the physical body. He looked at Harry carefully. And the telepathy, tell me what you're picking up right now. You're focused, Harry said. You're trying not to think anything particularly loudly because you think it would be rude, but underneath that there's something that's almost like relief. Like you were worried about something and it's resolving in a direction you hoped for. He looked at Mora. You're curious, specifically, like a physical thing, like you want to be writing faster than you are. And there's also something you're not saying, a question you've decided to save. Mora looked up from her notes. That's a very precise reading. Sorry, Harry said automatically. Don't apologize, Charles said firmly. You've done nothing wrong. You're describing your experience of the world accurately, and that's exactly what I asked you to do. Harry looked at his hands for a moment. The thing Mora isn't saying, he said. He looked at her. You can ask it. I can already hear the shape of it. Mora put her pen down. The scar, she said. What can you tell me about it? Not physically, the other thing, the thing behind it. Harry was very still. You know about that too. Charles told me what he sensed last night. She kept her voice completely even, not clinical, not alarmed. But I'd rather hear what you know. Harry thought about how to describe something he'd never put into words. There's a sound, he said finally. Not always, but sometimes when I'm very tired or just waking up, I hear it's like a frequency, like a radio station that's almost tuned in. And when I hear it, it feels cold. Everything else is warm. He touched the scar without thinking about it, fingertips against the lightning bolt. I've always had it. I thought everyone had something like that, a thing they could almost hear. Not everyone, no, Charles said gently. But you've been living alongside it your entire life and you've clearly found an equilibrium with it. That's quite remarkable in itself. Is it dangerous? Harry asked. He asked the way he asked everything directly, braced for an honest answer. Potentially, Charles said. We're going to understand it better before we try to do anything about it, and we're not going to do anything about it without your full knowledge and consent. He paused. But I want to be truthful with you, Harry. What I sensed in that signal, there's another presence in there. Very faint, very dormant, and I believe it's connected to whatever happened to you as a child. My parents, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Your file says they died in a car accident, Mora said carefully. I know, Harry said. I've always known that wasn't true. He said it simply. The way I know things, it didn't feel true. Charles looked at him. What do you think did happen? Something found them, Harry said, and then it found me and I was too small to die from it, I think, or something stopped it. He touched the scar again. I think the scar is what's left, like a record. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the grounds were bright and the trees were doing their slow afternoon business, and somewhere above them, a student was running in a corridor and had been told twice to stop. You've been working this out on your own, Charles said, for years. I had a lot of time in the cupboard, Harry said. No bitterness, just fact. Mora made a sound that might have been involuntary. We're going to figure it out together from here, Charles said. All of it, your ability, the scar, your history, and none of it happens on a timetable except yours. He leaned forward slightly. But right now I'd like to ask you to do something for me. What? Push, Charles said. With the telekinesis, not at anything in particular, just out, let me see the actual range of it. Harry looked at him, then he looked at the room. Then carefully he let the thing he always kept contained, the sense of the space around him, the weight and presence of things, he let it out. The books moved first, all of them, a slight collective shiver like a held breath releasing. Then the chairs, not dramatically, just an inch or two, shifting under their occupants. The curtains lifted on a window that wasn't open. The lamp on the desk rotated 45 degrees. Harry reached through the floor and felt the rooms below, the corridor, the kitchen, the training room, the basement he hadn't been to yet. And he touched them all at once. Gently, the way you'd press your palm to a wall to feel if the building is warm. He was aware peripherally that Mora had stopped writing. He pulled it back in. The room settled, the lamp returned. The curtains dropped. Harry looked at Charles. Charles was very still. His expression was doing something that took Harry a moment to categorize. It was the look of a man seeing exactly what he expected to see and finding that it was still more than he'd prepared himself for. Right, Charles said. Right. He took a breath. And have you ever pushed harder than that? Not on purpose, Harry said. The owl arrived at 4 o'clock. Mrs. Hudson found it in the front hall, a tawny owl sitting on the banister with the patient, vaguely judgmental expression of an animal that has delivered important correspondence before and knows exactly how significant it is, regardless of whether the recipients have any idea. It was carrying a letter sealed with red wax impressed with a crest, a large letter H, quartered with a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. The letter was addressed in green ink, in handwriting that managed to be simultaneously old-fashioned and extremely precise. Mr. H. Potter, the front bedroom, second floor, Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, Westchester County, New York, United States of America. Mrs. Hudson brought it to Charles, because Mrs. Hudson had been working in this house for 12 years and had developed finely tuned instincts about what required immediate professorial attention. Charles looked at the address, specifically at the accuracy of it, second floor, front bedroom, which was exactly where Harry's room was, and felt something settle in him with the weight of inevitability. He'd known in the abstract that this was coming. The magical world had been a known quantity to him for some years, one of many hidden currents running beneath the world's official surface. He'd encountered it peripherally once or twice in the way that people of significant psychic ability sometimes do. He'd known there was a system, a government of sorts, a school that was apparently the most significant institution they had. He'd found the boy first. He held that fact close. He took the letter to Harry. Harry was in the library. He'd been in the library since the assessment ended, working through a fairly advanced book on genetics with the focused intensity of someone who has been given access to information for the first time and is making up for lost time. He looked up when Charles came in. Charles held out the letter. Harry looked at it. He took it. He broke the seal and read it, his expression cycling through several things that Charles tracked without intruding. When he finished, he read it again. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he said. Yes, witchcraft and wizardry, Harry repeated, not disbelieving, integrating. The magical world is real, Charles said. It operates in parallel to ours, largely hidden. They have their own system of education, their own government, their own everything, really. Harry looked at the letter. They want me to go to school there starting September. So it appears. Do they know I'm here? They found you very specifically, Charles said. The address is exact. They knew exactly where you were, which means their locating system, whatever it is, updated in real time. He folded his hands. They have resources I don't fully understand. Harry set the letter down on the table. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at Charles. Am I a wizard? I believe, Charles said carefully, that you are both. What's inside you is, the two things don't appear to be separate. Your mutation and whatever magical capacity you carry seem to be operating from the same source. Which I suspect neither world has encountered before. Harry thought about this with the focused seriousness he brought to everything. So two worlds want me, he said. It seems that way. And you think I should? I think, Charles said, that this is entirely your decision. I want you to understand that this school, this place, your room upstairs, none of that changes based on what you decide about Hogwarts. You're not a guest here, Harry. You're a student. That's not contingent. Harry looked at the letter again. The owl, which had followed Charles at a respectful distance, was sitting on the back of a chair nearby and watching all of this with unblinking authority. The owl knew where I was, Harry said, even though I only moved here yesterday. Yes. That means they've always known where I was, Harry said very evenly. When I was in the cupboard, Charles held the pause. That does appear to be the implication, he said. Harry's jaw tightened, not much, but Charles noticed. All right, Harry said. He picked the letter up, folded it, set it aside. What happens next? Someone will come, Charles said, from their world to escort you to their supplies shopping district and then to the school, usually, I believe, around the child's birthday. My birthday's in 3 weeks, Harry said, July 31st. Then we have 3 weeks. Charles looked at him. Use them well, get to know the people here, use the training facilities. Read all the books Jean pretends she's already read. And when the time comes, we'll face whatever comes from the wizarding world together. He paused. And I do mean together. I won't be sending you to any new world without support. Harry looked at him. Something moved briefly across his face, something that was almost surprise, quickly replaced with something warmer and less guarded than most of his expressions. Okay, he said. He reached for the genetics textbook. Then he stopped and said, without looking up, Professor Xavier. When you said you'd never seen anything like my mind, was that true, or were you being kind? I don't do kindness at the expense of accuracy, Charles said. It was true. Right, Harry said and turned the page. I thought so. 3 weeks turned out to be both sufficient and insufficient in the way that time always is when it matters. Harry learned the mansion. He learned its morning sounds, the coffee machine, Logan's boots, the specific creak of the third stair that Jean always forgot was there. He learned that Scott ran the track at 5:45 every morning without deviation, and that Aurora was always in the greenhouse at 7, and that the third-floor east corridor had a cold spot that had nothing to do with the building's heating system, and everything to do with the fact that Bobby Drake was usually somewhere nearby. He met Bobby, who was 14 and could generate ice, and was the most immediately friendly person Harry had ever encountered, with the warm, easy sociability of someone who had simply decided to like people, until they gave him a reason not to. Bobby shook his hand and immediately offered to show him the kitchen's ice cream situation, which he described as extensive. And Harry found him in the kitchen at approximately 10 o'clock that first evening, eating mint chocolate chip directly from the tub and explaining the social geography of the school with the casual expertise of a natural anthropologist. He met Hank McCoy via book, specifically by reaching for the same book at the same moment from opposite sides of a shelf in the library, and then staring at each other through the gap. Hank was 16 and covered in blue fur that he wore with the studied equanimity of someone who has made peace with being impossible to overlook, and he was the most widely read person Harry had ever encountered. He put the book down, they both claimed victory, and spent the next 2 hours reading different sections of it across the same table. He trained. He went to the danger room with Jean and worked through increasingly complex exercises that started very simply, moving a block from here to there and escalated quickly. On the third day, Jean put a wall between them and they held a conversation entirely in thoughts, and when they came out of it they both sat down on the floor and didn't say anything for several minutes. "You're better at the sending part than I am," Jean said eventually. "Your signal is cleaner." "You're better at the receiving," Harry said. "You can catch a thought I didn't mean to send." "I need to be able to not do that," she said. "It's the hard part, shutting out what you don't want to hear." "What's it like?" Harry asked. "A school full of people and you can hear all of them." Jean picked at the edge of her sneaker. "Loud," she said. "At first it was so loud I couldn't." She stopped. "Professor X taught me to build walls in here." She tapped her temple. "Mental architecture, he calls it. You make structures in your mind and they filter the input." She looked at him. "Have you been doing anything like that?" Harry considered. "I've been doing something, I never knew what to call it." "Show me," she said. And for the first time in his life, Harry lowered a wall he'd been maintaining since he was old enough to understand that the things he heard weren't what everyone else heard, and let Jean see the structure of it. The careful, complex, self-built architecture of an 8-year-old who'd constructed his own psychic defenses out of necessity alone without any instruction or framework, and built them so well that Jean actually made a sound of involuntary admiration. "Harry," she said, "who taught you this?" "No one," he said. She stared at him. "You built this yourself. Is it wrong?" "It's not wrong, it's..." She shook her head. "It's like finding out someone who's never had a music lesson has been playing concert piano in a locked room for 8 years. Harry thought about this. "Is that good or bad?" "It's good," she said firmly. "It just means you've been..." She looked at him with an expression he was learning to recognize as Jean working something out. "You've been alone in there a very long time." "Yes," Harry said simply. "I have." Jean nodded. She didn't try to make it better or softer. She just nodded and said, "Well, not anymore," and held out her hand for a training round that ended 40 minutes later with all the furniture on one side of the room, and both of them laughing so hard they couldn't stand up properly. The night before his birthday, Harry couldn't sleep. He was lying on his back staring at the ceiling, which was his and only his and always would be as high as it needed to be. And he was thinking about the letter from Hogwarts and the man who would probably arrive tomorrow and the world that had always known where he was and had never come. Logan knocked once and opened the door without waiting, which was simply how Logan moved through the world. He came in, sat in the chair by the desk, and said nothing. Harry said nothing. They were both fairly good at that. After a while, Logan said, "You nervous?" "No," Harry said. "I'm angry. It feels like nervousness, but it isn't." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Who at?" Harry stared at the ceiling. "Whoever decided I was better off in that cupboard," he said. "Whoever knew where I was and didn't come for 8 years. "Yeah," Logan said. "That's a fair thing to be angry about. Professor Xavier says there are probably reasons, that things are complicated." "Chuck's very diplomatic," Logan said. "I'll tell you what I think. I think someone put you somewhere safe and then forgot to check if safe was still the right word." He paused. "I think people with plans sometimes forget that the plan involves a person." Another pause. "I've met a few people like that in my life, well-intentioned, not wrong exactly, but they arrange things," Harry said, instead of asking. "Yeah." Harry turned his head to look at Logan. In the near dark, with only the hall light coming under the door, his face was mostly shadow. "Are you the kind of person who arranges things?" "No," Logan said. "I'm the kind of person who shows up." He said it without pride, just fact. "There's a difference." Harry looked at the ceiling again. "I know," he said. Logan stayed until Harry's breathing evened out. He was gone by the time Harry was actually asleep, which meant Harry never knew he'd been there for another hour, just sitting in the chair in the dark with his hands folded and the particular patient stillness of a man who had decided that this was where he was going to be. Outside, the grounds were very quiet. The trees did their slow work. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the wizarding world was waking up and beginning to turn its attention toward a boy who it had always assumed would be where it left him, waiting for the moment when he was needed. It was going to be surprised. Chapter 3. The Headmaster Comes. The man appeared at the front gate at 10 o'clock on the morning of Harry's birthday. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the intercom. He simply stood at the iron gate at the end of the long drive and waited, which managed to be both perfectly polite and subtly presumptuous in a way that Harry suspected was entirely deliberate. He was tall, with a very long silver beard and half-moon spectacles, wearing deep purple robes that should have looked absurd in a Westchester suburb and somehow didn't. He had the unhurried quality of someone who had decided, long ago, that time moved at his pace rather than the other way around. Harry saw him from the window of the first-floor sitting room, where he'd been doing the reading Professor Xavier had assigned for the week, a fairly demanding text on psychic theory that Jean had annotated so extensively in pencil that it was essentially a two-author work by this point. He looked at the man at the gate. The man at the gate did not look back because he had no way of knowing where Harry was, but Harry could feel him. Even at this distance, through the gate and the drive and the windows of the house, there was a presence that pressed against Harry's awareness like a warm hand on a closed door, vast, patient, layered. This was a mind of significant power, and it was the kind of power that had been operating at high levels for so long it had become structural, built into the way the person moved through the world. Harry felt something else underneath it, a plan, not its specifics but its shape, the shape of a mind that was always thinking 3 moves ahead. He went to find Professor Xavier. Charles had felt the arrival before Harry came to tell him about it. He'd been in his study with the door open and a cup of tea going cold on the desk, because he'd sensed the approach about 20 minutes before the man reached the gate, a psychic signature that was significant enough to register even without Cerebro, distinctive in the way of minds that had been doing very powerful things for a very long time. When Harry appeared in the doorway, Charles looked up. "I know," he said. "I was just deciding how to handle it." "He's at the gate," Harry said. "Yes." Charles picked up his tea, found it cold, set it down again. "His name is Albus Dumbledore. He's the headmaster of Hogwarts. He's also, by most accounts, one of the most powerful practitioners of magic currently alive." "He feels large," Harry said, which was not quite the right word but was the honest one. "He is large," Charles said, "in every sense of the word." He looked at Harry carefully. "I want to say something before we invite him in." "All right." "He's not a villain," Charles said. "I want to be precise about that. He is, as far as I can determine, a person of genuine good intentions and extraordinary capability who has spent decades making decisions that he believes serve the greater good. The problem with people like that," he paused, "is that they stop asking permission," Harry said. Charles looked at him. "Yes, exactly." He set his hands on the wheels of his chair. "He's going to have a plan for you. He may have had one since before you were born. He's going to believe in it deeply and argue for it compellingly, and most of what he says will be true." He met Harry's eyes. "You're 8 years old and you're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met, and it is entirely your right to tell him." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Are you worried he'll convince me?" "I'm worried about what happens when 2 very large forces meet," Charles said carefully, "to everything in between them." Harry thought about this. Then he said, "Should I be there for the meeting?" "I think," Charles said, "that this meeting is fundamentally about you, and conducting it without you would be precisely the kind of decision-making we're trying to move away from." He turned his chair toward the door. "Yes, you should absolutely be there." Logan let Dumbledore in, which felt like the right choice in the way that putting 2 weather systems in the same room and stepping back felt like the right choice, not comfortable but clarifying. Logan opened the gate, looked at Dumbledore and said, "Identification." "What?" Dumbledore looked at him with eyes that were a very bright blue and contained, Harry thought, the particular twinkle of someone who found almost everything at least mildly amusing. "I'm afraid I don't carry the sort of identification your system would recognize," he said. His voice was warm and measured, with the cadence of someone accustomed to rooms falling quiet when they spoke. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I'm expected." "You're not expected," Logan said. "You showed up." "An important distinction," Dumbledore agreed, as if Logan had made a fascinating philosophical point. Nevertheless, Logan held the gate for another moment, not long but long enough to establish the principle, and then stepped back. Dumbledore walked up the drive with the ease of a man arriving at a house he'd visited many times, though Harry was fairly certain he hadn't. He came into the front hall and stopped. His eyes went immediately to Harry with the focused, careful attention of someone seeing a thing they've been looking for. He looked at the scar. He looked at Harry's eyes. He looked at the scar again. Harry, he said, and his voice had shifted, quieter, warmer, something in it that was genuine and complicated. My dear boy, you've grown. We've never met, Harry said. Number we haven't, a pause that Harry couldn't quite interpret. But I knew your parents very well. He said it with the weight of a thing that was both offering and apology. You look extraordinarily like your father. Something moved in Harry's chest, not grief exactly, because you couldn't grieve people you'd never known, but the shape where grief would be if there were anything to hold on to. He kept his face level. Professor Xavier said you'd want to talk. I'd very much like to, yes. Charles appeared from the study corridor. Appearing was the right word for how Charles moved, quiet and precise. He extended his hand to Dumbledore. Albus, thank you for coming in person. Charles, Dumbledore shook it. Their eyes met for a moment over the handshake that Harry suspected contained significantly more information than it looked like. It's been some years. 17, Charles said. You look well. And you? He glanced at the wheelchair, then away in the way of someone reminding themselves not to comment on the thing they'd just noticed. I understand congratulations are in order. The school has flourished. It has. Shall we go through? They went through. The sitting room that Mrs. Hudson used for formal guests had been arranged with the unconscious tactical sense of someone who'd hosted many difficult meetings. 2 sofas facing each other across a low table, chairs at angles that didn't imply confrontation, a window behind the secondary position that provided light without glare. Logan stood near the door with his arms folded and the particular stillness of a man who was deciding, on a moment-to-moment basis, whether to be furniture. Dumbledore sat in the larger sofa. Charles sat across from him. Harry sat beside Charles, which felt like the right place to be, not behind him, not at a separate remove, beside. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those sharp, warm eyes. How are you finding the school? He asked. Good, Harry said. Better than Surrey. Something crossed Dumbledore's face, gone quickly, but Harry caught it, something that was not quite guilt and not quite regret, but lived in the same neighborhood. Yes, he said. I understand you've been staying with your aunt and uncle. In their cupboard mostly, Harry said, pleasantly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. And it was genuine. Harry could feel the authenticity of it. I placed you with them believing it was the safest option available. The protections, he paused, choosing words. There is a very specific magical protection that operates through a blood relative's home. A sacrifice my mother made for you when she died, your mother, he corrected himself. As long as you could call that place home, nothing magical could touch you. So the choice was between magical safety and a cupboard, Harry said. The choice was between your survival and your comfort, Dumbledore said, and the honesty of it was striking enough that Harry sat with it rather than responding immediately. I am not telling you it was the right choice. I am telling you it was the choice I made, and I have thought about it every day since. Charles spoke mildly. The magical protection you're describing, does it still apply now that Harry has left? The protection is bound to Harry's survival past a certain age and to his mother's sacrifice, which is not location-dependent once he's old enough. Dumbledore looked at Charles with the considering expression of a man recalibrating. He is safe regardless of where he is. The Dursley household was, another pause. I believe the arrangement was more acceptable than it appears to have been. You didn't check, Logan said from the door. Dumbledore looked at him. No, he said, I delegated that. To who? To someone I trusted, who trusted their own assessment, which was less thorough than it should have been. He turned back to Harry. I am not going to explain this to you as an excuse. I tell you so that you understand I am not unaware of how badly I failed you in that regard. Harry looked at him steadily. He was doing his calculation, reading the man, not just his words, reading the actual texture of his intentions, which were large and complex, and he was right, Charles was right, genuinely aimed at something good even when the aim was off. You want me to go to Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes, no preamble. Why? Several reasons, Dumbledore said. He reached into his robes and produced nothing. He'd apparently decided against bringing visual materials, which Harry thought was either confidence or a calculated choice to keep the meeting conversational. You are a wizard of extraordinary potential, Harry. Your family has a long history in the magical world. Your mother she was brilliant, one of the most gifted witches of her generation. Your father as well. You have a world that is waiting for you, that is yours by right. And, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, the twinkle dialed back very slightly. There is a situation, he said carefully, that you are connected to by the events of your parents' deaths. The person responsible, he is not gone. He is weakened but not destroyed, and he will return in some form. When he does, the magical world will it'll need me, Harry said. Yes, Harry was quiet. Beside him, he could feel Charles being very still, not intervening, not guiding, just present. Beside him, not in front of him. So you want me to go to Hogwarts, Harry said. Learn magic, grow up in the wizarding world, and eventually fight the person who killed my parents. I want you to be prepared, Dumbledore said. Hogwarts would. I am being prepared, Harry said. He said it without heat, without defensiveness, just fact. Professor Xavier has. Your mutation is remarkable, Dumbledore said, and something in his voice shifted not dismissively but carefully, like a man trying to explain that the tool you're using, while impressive, is not the right tool for this particular job. But the magical world operates on principles that are distinct from mutant abilities. You will need to understand both, to navigate both, to use both, Harry said. Yes, I know, he paused. I'm 8. I've known I was going to fight someone since I was old enough to understand what my scar is. He looked at Dumbledore with the direct, green-eyed attention that Charles had seen stop people in their tracks before. What I want to know is whether I'm going to Hogwarts as a student or as a weapon you're keeping in a school-shaped box until you need me. The room was very quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Whatever calculation he was running was invisible, but Harry could feel the texture of it, the rapid, sophisticated reassessment of a man who had arrived expecting a child and found something considerably more complicated. You are very like your mother, Dumbledore said. His voice was quiet. She asked me very similar questions once in very similar language. Was she right to ask them? Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, she was. Then I'll ask mine too. Harry leaned forward slightly. If I come to Hogwarts and I haven't decided, I go as myself, not as the boy who lived, not as a symbol or a savior or a chess piece, I go as Harry. He paused. Can you agree to that? Dumbledore looked at him for another long moment. Then he said, I can agree to try, and I will tell you honestly that trying is the best I can offer. Because the wizarding world will have its own ideas about who you are, and those ideas are not entirely within my power to manage. That's fair, Harry said. At least it's honest. Charles spoke for the first time in some minutes. There's also the matter of Harry's current enrollment here. I consider him my student, regardless of what he decides about Hogwarts. If he attends, I would expect reciprocal enrollment. He continues his training here during breaks. He has access to this school, these resources, these people. A pause that was delicate and steel cord simultaneously. That's not a negotiation point. Dumbledore looked at Charles. The meeting of those two minds, even filtered through polite conversation, was a thing Harry could feel like a change in air pressure. You care for him, Dumbledore said, not accusingly. He's been in my care for 3 weeks, Charles said. Yes, I do. In 11 years of his life, he's been in mine for considerably longer, even at a distance. He held Charles's gaze. I am not your adversary in this, Charles. I know, Charles said, which is why I'm speaking to you as a colleague rather than filing paperwork. He let that land. But Harry's welfare is not going to be subordinate to either world's agenda, including mine. Dumbledore looked at Harry again. You've found good people, he said. Yes, Harry said, I have. He paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. The thing in my scar, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression did something very small and very controlled. You know what it is. Silence. You've known for longer than I've been alive, probably, Harry said. What is it? Dumbledore was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Outside, a cloud moved across the sun and the room shifted from bright to dim and back again. It is, Dumbledore said finally, something that requires a great deal of context to explain, and that context is, he stopped. You deserve to know, you have always deserved to know. I have been waiting for the right moment, which I recognize now. Hearing myself say it is another way of saying I was afraid of the consequences of telling you. Tell me now, Harry said. Harry, tell me now, Harry said again. Same tone. No variation, no escalation. He didn't need to escalate. The request was already complete. Dumbledore looked at him, then at Charles, who returned the look with perfect, unhelpful neutrality that communicated, this is Harry's conversation, not mine. The man who killed your parents, Dumbledore said slowly. His name is Voldemort. You'll hear people call him you-know-who, or he who must not be named. I recommend against that habit. Fear of a name is a weakness, and you appear to have very little fear of anything. He paused. When he tried to kill you, something happened that I believe has never happened before. The curse, a killing curse, the most lethal magic in existence, rebounded. Because of the protection your mother's sacrifice created, it did not kill you, but it also did not fully kill him. He stopped. He split, Harry said quietly, not a guess. Dumbledore stared at him. How do you? I can feel it, Harry said. In the scar, it's not just a scar, there's a piece of him in there. He touched it again, that reflexive gesture. I've known there was something, I didn't know whose. Dumbledore's composure, which was formidable, showed the first genuine crack Harry had seen, not collapsing but giving slightly like stone with a fault line. You felt it, he said. I've always felt it. Harry looked at him directly. Is it dangerous to me? To the people around me? In its current state, dormant as it has been, number, but if Voldemort regains strength, he may be able to use the connection. Dumbledore leaned forward. Which is why, Harry, this is why your training, your preparation, your ability to defend yourself is not merely academic, it is urgent. I know, Harry said. That's not new information. No, Dumbledore said. I imagine it isn't. They broke for tea at noon. in the way that difficult conversations often require a pause to breathe in. Mrs. Hudson provided it without being asked, which was one of her most valuable qualities, along with scones that were better than the situation strictly deserved. Harry took his tea to the window and stood looking out at the grounds. Jean was on the lawn below, practicing something that involved lifting several large stones and stacking them in configurations that defied stability. He watched her work and felt, from 2 floors up, the clean, precise thread of her telekinesis and thought about what Dumbledore had said about his mother. She was brilliant, one of the most gifted witches of her generation. He had no face to put to this. No voice. The library book he'd brought from Privet Drive was about the solar system, not about his family, because you can't look for what you don't know is missing. He turned the information over in his mind. Brilliant, gifted, she died making a wall of protection out of her own life, and tried to find a feeling large enough for it and found the effort exhausting in a way he wasn't accustomed to. Logan materialized beside him with the uncanny quiet he maintained when he chose to. He stood looking out the window at Jean below. "You doing all right?" he said. "Processing," Harry said. "Take your time." "He's not lying," Harry said. "About any of it, I can tell." "I know," Logan said. "Chuck knows too. That's the problem, not the solution. True things can be the most dangerous kind." He drank his coffee. He declined tea with such decisive finality that Mrs. Hudson had not pursued it. "What are you going to do? About Hogwarts? About all of it?" Harry looked at Jean's careful stone stack, which now had 7 elements and was defying several laws of physics. "I want to go," he said, "to Hogwarts. I think," he worked it out as he said it, "I think I need to know that world, because the thing in my scar is from that world. The person who killed my parents is from that world. I can't fight something I don't understand." "Makes sense," Logan said, "and I want to learn magic properly." Harry paused. "I think what I do and what they do is from the same place. I want to know what that place is." "Okay, but I'm not going without. I need to be able to come back here." Harry said it simply. "This is," he stopped, looked for the word, "this is home now. Hogwarts is school, this is home." Logan looked at him, then he looked back out the window. "Then that's what you tell him," he said, "and if he can't agree to that, he leaves without a deal." "You think Professor Xavier will support that?" "Chuck would burn down a polite conversation with a world-famous wizard to make sure you have somewhere to come back to," Logan said. "Yeah, he'll support it." Harry nodded. He drank his tea. Below, Jean's stone tower reached 8 elements and then, with a small sound of satisfaction he couldn't actually hear but felt, stopped. The afternoon session was different in texture from the morning. Dumbledore had done his own processing during the break. Harry could feel it, the sense of a very large, very sophisticated mind rearranging its furniture. When they reconvened, he sat differently, less at the formal angle of a headmaster making an offer and more at the angle of a person who had decided to be less strategic and more honest. "I want to propose something," Dumbledore said, "and I want to be clear that it is a proposal, not a directive." "All right," Charles said. "Harry comes to Hogwarts in September. He is enrolled as a first-year student and treated as such, given the time and space to learn magic at the appropriate pace to make friends, to be a child." He looked at Harry. "With full access to this school and its resources during holidays and an open communication channel with Professor Xavier at all times." He paused. "In exchange, I would ask that Harry work with me periodically to understand the situation with Voldemort, not as a soldier. As someone who has a right to know the full truth of their own history." Harry looked at him. "That's more reasonable than what I was expecting." "I have been recalibrating," Dumbledore said with the particular self-awareness of a man who was very good at it even when it was uncomfortable. "There are other conditions," Charles said. He produced a single sheet of paper from the side of his chair, just one, which Harry thought was elegant. "Harry's training regimen, he continues it during term. Whatever private study space is required, whatever schedule accommodation, Hogwarts provides it. That can be arranged. His identity is his to manage. No press, no appearances, no arrangement that positions him as a symbol before he's ready." "I cannot control the wizarding press entirely," Dumbledore said. "But you can control what happens inside your school." Charles held his gaze. "He is not a figurehead, Albus, he is a boy." "I know that," Dumbledore said quietly. "Then we agree," Charles said. They looked at each other for a moment that was either a handshake or a chess move or both. "Harry," Dumbledore said, "what do you say?" Harry had been listening to all of this with his tea cooling in his hands, and he'd been doing the thing he always did, reading the room, reading the people, taking the shape of the thing. He looked at Dumbledore. "I'll come to Hogwarts," he said, "and I'll learn magic and I'll figure out the Voldemort situation and I'll do whatever needs doing when the time comes." He paused. "But I want you to understand something." "Tell me," Dumbledore said. "I'm not doing this because it's my destiny or because the wizarding world needs a savior." Harry held the old man's gaze without blinking. I'm doing it because someone killed my parents and put a piece of themselves in my head without my permission, and I'd like to do something about that. On my terms, at my pace. Another pause. Are we clear? Dumbledore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then something in his face softened, not capitulation but genuine warmth, the look of a man encountering something that surprised him and finding the surprise a good one. Extraordinarily clear, he said. You are without question your mother's son. Good, Harry said. I hope so. Dumbledore stayed for dinner. This was Mrs. Hudson's idea, which she expressed by simply laying another place at the table, and no one contradicted her because no one ever contradicted Mrs. Hudson about table settings. He sat at the long dining room table between Jean and Hank, which positioned him approximately as far from Logan as the room allowed, which Harry suspected was also Mrs. Hudson's idea. Jean asked Dumbledore about Hogwarts. Hank asked about magical theory and whether it was compatible with empirical scientific methodology. Bobby asked if they had good food, and Dumbledore said the house elves were exceptional, and then Bobby said, "What's a house elf?" And the conversation that followed lasted through the main course and most of dessert. Harry sat at the other end of the table and watched Dumbledore navigate the X-Men with the bemused admiration of a general who has wandered into an unfamiliar army and is quietly revising his assumptions about what armies can look like. Aurora asked him 3 questions about the magical relationship with weather systems that he answered with visible and increasing delight, because she was asking things he'd never been asked before. Scott asked 2 precise questions about the hierarchy of the Ministry of Magic and what checks existed on its power, and Dumbledore's answers to those were notably more guarded, and Scott accepted this with a nod that suggested he'd heard the evasion and filed it. Logan did not ask anything. He ate his dinner and watched Dumbledore with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who had decided to take the full measure of a thing before speaking, and Dumbledore was clearly aware of being watched and was very good at pretending not to be. At the end of the meal, when Mrs. Hudson was bringing tea and Hank was explaining something to Bobby that involved a napkin and diagrams, Dumbledore looked down the table at Harry. "You have good people here," he said. He'd said it before to Charles, but now he said it differently, less observation, more acknowledgement. "Yes," Harry said, "I told you." "You did?" He looked at the table at Jean, who was now explaining something to Hank with her fork, at Bobby, who was laughing, at Aurora, who had her chin in her hand and was listening to Scott with the patient attention she brought to all things. At Logan, who was looking at the window or appeared to be. "I owe them gratitude," he said quietly, "for finding you before." He stopped. "Before you did," Harry said. "Yes." He said it cleanly without flinching from it. "Before I did." "They didn't find me," Harry said. "Professor Xavier found me, and then he came himself instead of sending someone." He held the old man's eyes. "That's not a small thing." "No," Dumbledore said, "it isn't." He left at 9 o'clock, declining the offer of a guest room with the grace of a man accustomed to moving between places in unconventional ways. He shook Charles's hand in the front hall with both of his, which meant something, Harry thought, though he wasn't sure exactly what. He said goodbye to several of the students by name, which he'd learned during dinner and apparently retained without effort. When he got to Harry, he stopped. He looked at him for a moment, really looked, in the way he'd done when he first arrived, taking stock. "I'm going to spend the next several weeks," he said, feeling very guilty about the cupboard. "You should," Harry said. "A bit." Dumbledore's mouth curved. "Happy birthday, Harry." He reached into his robes and produced a small package wrapped in what appeared to be constellation-patterned paper, which he handed over. "I know it's slightly late in the day. I'm afraid I've always been better at the dramatic entrance than the punctual one." Harry took it. He opened it. Inside was a small, warm gold compass that didn't point north. The needle moved slowly and consistently towards something that wasn't any direction on a conventional map. "What does it point to?" Harry asked. "Whatever matters most to you," Dumbledore said. "At any given moment, it's a very old piece of magic. I've had it for a long time and never found a better use for it." He looked at it in Harry's hand. "Take care of yourself, Harry," and he looked up. "Don't trust the plan, trust the people." Harry looked at him. "Is that advice or an apology?" "Both," Dumbledore said, rather compressed. He walked down the front steps and down the drive and through the gate, and then he was gone, not dramatically, not with a flash of light, just absent in the way of very powerful things that have decided to be elsewhere. Harry stood on the step and looked at the compass in his hand. The needle turned slowly and pointed back into the house, toward the dining room, toward the warmth and noise and light still coming from the windows. He closed his hand around it and went back inside. Charles was waiting in the hall, not lurking, simply there as if he'd found a reason to be in that particular spot at that particular moment, which was exactly what he'd done. "Well," he said. "Well," Harry said. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it. "Like the shape of the next few years just became visible," he said. "I don't love all of it, but at least I can see it." Charles nodded. That's a reasonable response to a great deal of information in one day. He's going to be difficult, Harry said, not maliciously, but he's not used to not being the one with the plan. Number he isn't, Charles looked at him steadily. You handled him very well. I just said what was true, Harry said. That's usually the most efficient option. Usually, Charles agreed, not always, you'll learn the difference. He turned his chair toward the corridor. It's your birthday, Mrs. Hudson made a cake. It's been sitting in the kitchen since this morning, getting more pointed about being acknowledged. Harry felt something that he was still getting used to feeling, uncomplicated, warm, small in the best possible way. What kind? She asked me what kind you'd like. I said I didn't know yet. She said she'd make all three and you could choose. A pause. She made chocolate, lemon, and something with berries that she describes as the serious one. Harry almost laughed. The serious one, her words entirely. They went down the corridor toward the kitchen, where the sound of the others was already reaching them. Bobby's laugh, Jean's voice, Hank explaining something, the warm noise of a table full of people who were waiting. Harry walked toward it and thought, two worlds, both of them suddenly violently interested in him. One had known where he was for 8 years and sent a letter. The other had known for 3 weeks and sent a person. He knew which one he was walking toward tonight. The rest, Hogwarts, Voldemort, the piece of cold darkness wound through his scar, the war that was apparently already queued up and waiting for him to be old enough, all of that was future. Real and coming and his to deal with. But tonight there was cake, apparently 3 kinds, and people who had set a place for him at the table before they even knew what he could do, and the compass in his pocket was pointing straight ahead, and Harry Potter walked into the light. Chapter 4, Diagon Alley. The portkey was a dented tin can, which Harry felt was unnecessarily humble for what it was supposed to accomplish. Dumbledore had arranged it. A small package arrived at Xavier's school 2 weeks after his birthday visit, containing the can, a folded note with activation instructions, and a second note that was clearly an afterthought, written in slightly less composed handwriting than the first. I would recommend keeping the portkey away from the metalokinetic if possible. Charles had read this last note, looked briefly at the ceiling, and then drafted a response explaining that Eric Laneshire did not, in fact, live at the school and that Dumbledore might want to update his intelligence sources. They were going to Diagon Alley. Harry, Charles, Logan, and Jean, who had requested inclusion with such calm certainty that declining had never really become an option. Scott had wanted to come and had been talked out of it, which had taken 20 minutes, and involved Charles making 3 separate points about operational security, and Scott making one very good counterpoint that Charles had acknowledged while still declining. Harry held the can at 10:50 in the morning, standing in the back garden with the others, and felt its peculiar magical resonance, a low, patient hum that was distinct from the psychic frequencies he was accustomed to. Magic felt different from what he could do. His abilities felt like extension, like the world was a body and his mind was learning to inhabit it. Magic felt like conversation, like the world responding to a specific language it had been waiting to hear. Has everyone gone to the bathroom? Logan said. We're not taking a car journey, Jean said. I'm just asking. On 3, Charles said and touched the can, and said Diagon with the steadiness of a man who had practiced the word 3 times that morning, and the world folded. The sensation of portkey travel was, Harry decided, exactly what it would feel like to be picked up by the scruff of the neck by something the size of a building. The world compressed, spun, and then uncompressed with an abruptness that deposited them in a small courtyard behind a pub that smelled of fire whiskey and old wood. Jean grabbed the wall. Logan stood with his feet slightly wider than usual and the expression of someone cataloging a novel threat. Charles's chair had arrived at a slight angle and he corrected it with the calm efficiency of someone who had navigated worse transitions. Harry landed on his feet, already looking around. The leaky cauldron was dim and low-ceilinged and full of people who were clearly not entirely mundane. There were robes, pointed hats worn unironically, familiars of various descriptions, and a sense of accumulated magical residue that pressed against Harry's awareness like warm fog. Faces turned toward them, and Harry watched the sequence of recognition move through the pub like a ripple. The confused recognition of people who sensed something unusual without knowing what, and then, for the older patrons, the ones who'd lived through something, the sharper recognition that fixed on Harry's forehead and went very still. Don't look at anyone directly, Harry said to the group. Good call, Logan said. The barman, a hunchbacked man with an almost aggressively kind expression, appeared at his elbow before they'd taken 3 steps. You'll be wanting the alley, he said, looking at Harry with eyes that contained a complicated mixture of awe and something that was almost grief. Right through the back, sir. All that is, it's good to your parents were. He stopped himself. Right through the back. Harry looked at him. He wasn't going to be unkind to this man who was clearly struggling with the weight of something real. Thank you, he said, and then because he felt it and it seemed worth saying, they were good people. The barman looked like he'd been handed something he didn't know how to hold. The best, he managed. Harry nodded once and went through the back. The brick wall in the courtyard was, Charles thought, one of the more elegant pieces of concealment he'd encountered, not a psychic block or a technological mask, but a structural enchantment that interfaced with human perception directly. He watched Harry tap the bricks in the sequence Dumbledore had included in his note, and the wall opened like an inhale, bricks folding back into an archway that revealed a street that should have been impossible to fit into that block of London. Diagon Alley hit all of them differently. Logan's eyes went immediately to the exit points, the crowd density, the potential choke points. Jean went soft with interest. Harry felt her telepathy expand instinctively, reaching, and then contract as she processed the sheer volume of minds, the overlapping psychic texture of a street full of people who all carried some degree of magical ability. She shook it off and focused. Charles went still in the particular way that meant he was taking in a great deal and deciding what to prioritize. Harry walked into it. The street was alive in a way that Westchester wasn't, in a way that Surrey absolutely wasn't. It was narrow and cobbled and teetering with shops that seemed to have been piled on top of each other in deliberate disregard for conventional architecture. The signs were hand-painted. An owl swooped overhead carrying a parcel. A woman argued with an animated measuring tape outside a robe shop while a small girl beside her turned a quill into a daisy and back into a quill with the distracted ease of someone performing a habit. Harry felt everything. The ambient magic was a constant low hum against his awareness, different from the psychic frequency he was used to but occupying a similar register, and the combination was extraordinary. It was like hearing a song he'd always known only the melody of suddenly with harmony. His whole mind felt wider. "You all right?" Jean said beside him. "Yes," Harry said. I can feel it, the magic." "What does it feel like?" "Like the psychic stuff, but he worked it out, like a different instrument playing the same note." Jean looked around the street with the expression she used when encountering genuinely new information. "I can't feel it the way you are, I can feel the people." She lowered her voice. "There's a lot of mixed emotion on this street right now, half these people recognize you." "I know," Harry said, "let's move fast." Gringotts was white marble and goblin-staffed, and had the atmosphere of a building that considered itself extremely serious, and was mildly offended by the continued existence of buildings that did not. Harry approached the main desk with Logan at his left shoulder and Charles beside him, and presented the small golden key that Dumbledore had also included in the package, his vault key, property of the Potter family vault, untouched since 1981. The goblin behind the desk, long-fingered, sharp-eyed, with the expression of someone who found humans mildly exhausting but professionally inevitable, looked at the key. Then at Harry. Then at the scar, which Harry was used to people looking at. Then back at the key. "Potter," the goblin said. "It was not a question. Harry Potter," Harry confirmed. "And your companions." "My school's headmaster, my mentor, and my colleague," Harry said, which was a reasonably accurate description of Charles, Logan, and Jean, respectively. He saw Charles's mouth do something brief and controlled that was almost a smile. "The vault master attends alone," the goblin said. "Then I'll send them to wait," Harry said. He looked at the goblin with the direct, unhurried attention he'd learned was more effective than any amount of authority or performance. "Or I could request a senior account manager and discuss why a visit from a vault account holder who hasn't been able to access his family's assets for 8 years, due to being a minor left in the care of people who were apparently not informed of the vault's existence, requires the vault master to attend alone." He paused. "I'd be interested in that conversation. Would you?" The goblin looked at him, a very long, measuring look. "Griffook," the goblin called without taking its eyes off Harry. "Vault escort for the Potter party, all 4. Jean, beside Harry, said nothing, but he felt her amusement like a warm hand between his shoulder blades. The vaults were extraordinary, not because of what was in them, though the Potter vault turned out to contain a quantity of gold galleons that Harry couldn't look at too long without the numbers becoming abstract, but because of what the underground cart system did to his spatial awareness. The tunnels went deep and long, and the cart moved at speed, and Harry's extended proprioceptive sense filled in the whole network of tunnels around him like an involuntary map, hundreds of intersecting passages in the rock, some of them vibrating with the particular resonance of very old magic. "Don't do the thing where you feel the whole mountain," Logan said without looking at him. "How did you know I was doing that?" "Your eyes went unfocused," Logan said. "Dead giveaway." Harry blinked and pulled his awareness back in. The vault was large and round and smelled of gold and old stone, and the piles of galleons were honestly somewhat excessive. He took a moderate amount not because he was being restrained, but because the weight of carrying more than he needed seemed like an inefficiency, and asked the goblin on the way back up whether there were other Potter assets beyond the vault. The goblin gave him a look that was almost but not quite respectful. There are properties, investments, and several legacy holdings that have been held in trust, it said. Pending your majority or the appointment of an appropriate magical guardian. I'll have my school's legal department contact yours, Charles said pleasantly from the back of the cart. I believe we can resolve the guardianship question fairly quickly. The goblin looked at Charles with fresh assessment. You are not magical, it said. No, Charles agreed, but I am thorough. Ollivander's was the last stop before lunch, and it was the stop Harry had been most curious about, the wand shop, the place where the magical world handed you the tool of your ability. He'd been thinking about wands since Dumbledore's letter, wondering what the relationship between a wand and his own abilities would look like. Whether they'd overlap, conflict, or do something neither world had a category for. The shop was narrow and dusty and floor-to-ceiling with boxes, and the man who appeared from somewhere between the shelves was old in the way of things that have been old for a very long time and made a kind of peace with it. He had large, pale eyes that moved to Harry with an attention so specific it felt almost like being handled. I wondered, Ollivander said, when I would see you. Here I am, Harry said. Indeed, he circled Harry once, looking at his hands, his face, the scar, and then something less visible that he was reading by some method Harry couldn't precisely identify but could feel. Wand arm. Either, Harry said. Ollivander stopped. Either, both feel the same. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment, then he went to the shelves and began pulling boxes. The first wand, birch and dragon heartstring, he handed over and Harry took it and felt nothing and handed it back. The second, cherry and phoenix feather, produced a shower of gold sparks from the tip that Ollivander observed with quiet intensity before reclaiming it. The third, holly and phoenix feather, did something Harry hadn't expected. It vibrated. A sustained harmonic vibration that resonated with the exact frequency of the dark thread in his scar, and Harry felt both things simultaneously, the wand reaching toward him and the fragment in his scar reaching back, like two halves of a signal finding each other. He held it and felt the magic in it like a current through water, clear and strong and native to him. The sparks it produced were red and gold and went all the way to the ceiling. Curious, Ollivander said. He was not talking to Harry, he was talking to the wand. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches. Reasonably supple, he looked at Harry with his pale eyes. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in that wand gave another feather, just one other. It is in the wand of the wizard who gave you that scar. I know, Harry said. The wand was still vibrating. Brother wands. You knew, Ollivander said. I felt it when I held it, Harry said. He looked at the wand. It's connected to something in me. Something I'm going to have to deal with eventually. The wand chooses the wizard, Ollivander said. In my experience, it also chooses the wizard's purpose. He looked at Harry with an expression that had dropped all professional performance and arrived somewhere more honest. Whatever comes, Mr. Potter, I believe you are better equipped for it than most. That's a low bar, Logan said from near the door. Logan, Jean said, I'm just saying. Ollivander looked at Logan with the expression of a man encountering something that did not fit any of his existing frameworks. Then he looked at Charles. Then at Jean, who he apparently felt psychically because he took a small, involuntary step back and then recovered his dignity. You've brought unusual companions, he said to Harry. I have good people, Harry said. He was aware he kept saying that. He didn't think he was going to stop. He paid for the wand 7 galleons, which seemed remarkably affordable for an object of this significance, and tucked it into his jacket and felt the vibration settle into something quieter and more persistent, like a second heartbeat he'd just become aware of. Outside, the 4 of them stood in the alley in the early afternoon light, and Harry held the wand in his hand and looked at it. Try something, Jean said. Harry pointed it at a pebble near his foot. He thought about lifting it, the same instinct he used for telekinesis, and let the magic follow the thought, and the pebble shot upward with approximately 3 times the force he'd intended and disappeared over the rooftops. He and Jean looked at the sky. You might want to dial that back, Logan said. The 2 systems are they're multiplying, Harry said. The magic goes through the wand and through whatever I already have and they amplify each other. He looked at the wand. I'm going to need to be careful. Understatement, Charles said. He was watching Harry with the focused, quiet attention he brought to genuinely novel situations. We'll work on calibration. Separately and then together. Harry nodded. He looked at the alley around them, the crowd, the shops, the owls, the accumulated weight of a hidden world going about its business, and felt briefly and powerfully the double nature of what he was, not divided, doubled. He was about to say something about lunch when he felt it. It came from behind and to the left, a mind with a specific signature, cold and purposeful and suddenly, sharply alert. Harry turned before he consciously decided to turn. 3 men standing at the mouth of a side alley between a bookshop and an apothecary. Robes, masks, not the full masks, just half concealment, which somehow made it worse, faces partially visible. One of them was looking directly at Harry with the specific intensity of someone who had been looking for something and found it. Harry read them in under 2 seconds. Not Death Eaters, not exactly, not yet, or not anymore, or not officially. But the ideology was right there, close to the surface, the specific shape of belief that organized itself around blood status and the memory of a master they still thought of with reverence. And underneath that, on one of them, something operational. A task. A directive, the boy, get the boy. Company, Harry said quietly. Logan had already moved. Not toward the men, he positioned himself between them and the group, hands still in his jacket pockets but his shoulders different. Charles turned his chair smoothly, taking in the whole field. Jean's awareness expanded outward. 3, Jean said, plus a 4th I can feel near the apothecary. He's doing something, a ward maybe, sealing the alley. They're trying to contain us, Harry said. They don't know what they're containing, Logan said. One of the men at the alley mouth had his wand out. He was pointing it at Harry with the forced steadiness of someone who had done this before and was not nervous enough, which Harry found more alarming than if he'd been afraid. Afraid people made mistakes, resolved people had to be stopped. Harry Potter, the man said, he had a voice like a closing door. You'll come with us. No, Harry said. I know it wasn't a request, Harry said. He was calm in the way he was always calm, not the calm of someone suppressing fear, but the calm of someone who had done their assessment and moved past it. You've made an error. Do you want to know what it is? The man's wand arm tensed. The other two shifted. The error, Harry said, is that you know what I am but not what I can do. And you know what they are. He indicated Charles and Logan and Jean with a slight tilt of his head, but also not what they can do. He paused. That's a significant amount of not knowing to bring to this situation. The man sent a spell without warning, a streaking red bolt that crossed the distance between them fast enough that it was clearly intended to end the conversation. Harry didn't use the wand. He put his hand up and the bolt stopped in the air 6 inches from his palm, rotating slowly like a leaf in still water. The magic in it was visible this time, red, crackling, straining against the telekinetic field he'd put around it. He felt the wand in his jacket warm against his side. Both systems engaged simultaneously, the amplification Jean had watched him discover playing out in real time. He let the spell dissipate. It unwound like smoke. The alley went very quiet. We can do this whatever way you'd like, Harry said, but I'd suggest the part where you leave. The 4th man, the one near the apothecary, the one setting the ward, Jean had already found him. Harry felt her mind move with the precise efficiency of 3 years of training, and the ward collapsed. And the man sat down heavily against the wall with the dazed expression of someone who'd had their concentration broken at a fundamental level. Logan's claws came out. He didn't raise his hands. He just stood there with 3 bright lines of adamantium on each hand, catching the afternoon light, and looked at the 3 men with the particular patience of someone who was giving them exactly 1 more second to make a good decision. The 3 men looked at Harry's hand where the spell had stopped. They looked at Jean, who was standing very still with her eyes slightly unfocused in the way of someone doing several things at once. They looked at Logan. They ran, not organized retreats. Ran, one of them grabbing a handful of the second one's robes and both of them taking the third with them as they apparated out, 3 cracks of displaced air in quick succession. The 4th stumbled upright and was gone a half-second later. Diagon Alley took about 3 seconds to process what it had just seen, and then the ambient noise of the street came back in a rush, and Harry lowered his hand and stood in the afternoon light with his heart rate entirely unchanged. Right, Logan said. He retracted the claws. The one who cast the spell, Jean said to Charles. I got something from him before they ran, not a lot, but the instruction came from someone specific. Someone local. They were meeting someone here today. She paused. It felt like a handover. They were going to take me somewhere, Harry said. He'd gotten the same impression but less clearly. To someone. Whoever it is, they know you're here, Charles said. His voice was entirely level, but his eyes were doing the specific thing they did when he was prioritizing and cataloging simultaneously. We need to move. Agreed, Harry said. They moved quickly, through the alley, past staring faces that parted without Harry asking them to because he was pushing slightly with the telekinesis. Not clearing a path dramatically, but making space efficiently. He could feel people's shock and fascination, and in some cases frank terror without wanting to. He caught one face in the crowd as they moved. A boy his age, blonde, with a sharp face, and the specific expression of someone who has witnessed something that has instantly reconfigured their understanding of the world. The boy was with a man who might have been his father, same blonde, same cheekbones, but where the boy looked struck, the man looked cold, calculating, deeply interested in a way Harry didn't like at all. Their eyes met, Harry's and the boy stared. Harry held the look for a moment without particular expression and then they were past. Who was that? Jean said quietly. Don't know, Harry said. Someone who matters. I can feel it, not now but later. They came out through the leaky cauldron's back entrance and into the Muggle streets and kept moving, and Charles put them in the van he'd arranged to park nearby, a Ministry of Transport vehicle that Scott had acquired through channels that Harry decided not to investigate, and they drove for 20 minutes without anyone saying anything important. Eventually Logan said, "You stopped a spell." "Yes," Harry said. "With your hand, with the telekinetic field, and the wand helped. You didn't use the wand. I didn't need it, it added force. I used my hand for precision." He looked at his palm. "They compound each other, magic and the mutation. I think they're the same energy at different frequencies, and the wand is a tuning tool. It makes the magic sharper. When they both run at once, the output is larger than either one separately." Logan looked at Charles, who was looking at Harry with the expression he got when a hypothesis had been confirmed at a scale he hadn't quite anticipated. "You should have led with the wand," Charles said. "Established the magical credential before showing the mutation." It would have taken longer," Harry said. "They had a directive, they weren't open to reassessment. The fastest way to end it was to show them enough that running became the obvious choice." Charles was quiet for a moment. "You assessed all of that in the moment." "You do it in the moment or you don't do it," Harry said. He hadn't meant it to sound like a lesson. He was fairly sure it had anyway. Jean was looking out the window. "He's right," she said. "The window was maybe 6 seconds between the first spell and when they'd have moved on all of us. He closed it before they could open a second one." "I know," Charles said. He looked at Harry, not with concern exactly, with something more complicated. "I know he's right." They took the portkey home from a side street in Islington, and the familiar compression and release deposited them on the back lawn of the school with the abruptness Harry had already started associating with travel between magical and non-magical spaces. Scott was waiting. He had his arms crossed and his red-lensed gaze going between all 4 of them, reading information the way he always did, efficiently, without asking, already calculating. "How bad?" he said. 4 of them, Jean said. "They ran." "Injuries? None of ours." She paused. "I'm not sure about theirs." Scott looked at Harry. "Was it you or her?" "Both," Harry said. "We didn't plan it, it just happened simultaneously." "You and Jean are going to need to work on synchronized deployment," Scott said. He said it the way he said most things, as a fact that had already been decided, with the implicit assumption that everyone present would find it as obvious as he did. "If you're going to be in the field together, Scott," Charles said. "He's 8, I know, but he stopped a spell with his hand in a crowded alley, so, Scott." Scott stopped. He looked at Charles. Charles looked back with the patience of a man who had been managing Scott Summers's tactical enthusiasm for some years and had made a kind of peace with it. "Perhaps we debrief inside," Charles said. They went in. Mrs. Hudson was in the kitchen and took one look at all of them and put the kettle on without speaking, which Harry had come to recognize as her highest expression of care. He sat at the kitchen table and put the wand on the table in front of him. He looked at it. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, and something in it that was already woven into him more deeply than he would have predicted after a single afternoon. Bobby appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at the group, looked at the wand, and said, "Cool, how was it?" "Eventful," Harry said. "Eventful good or eventful bad?" Harry looked at the wand. He thought about the stopped spell. He thought about the blonde boy's face in the crowd, the restructured understanding in his eyes. He thought about the vault underground and the quantity of gold and the feeling of a whole world opening up that was entirely his by right and that he'd had no access to, and that was going to require him to navigate it on his own terms, which was fine, which was simply what was going to happen. He thought about the way the magic and the mutation had run together in his hand like 2 rivers meeting, and the size of what that combination was, and the fact that nobody, not Dumbledore, not the Death Eaters in the alley, not Ollivander with his pale knowing eyes, nobody yet had seen the actual full extent of it. "Eventful good," Harry said. He picked up the wand. "We should debrief, and then I want to train." "Tonight," Bobby said. "Now," Harry said and stood up, and the compass in his jacket pocket turned without being asked toward the training room, as if the thing that mattered most to him was already moving in that direction. Chapter 5. The Sorting of Harry Potter. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it. He'd spent the last 3 weeks doing 2 things simultaneously. Learning to use the wand with enough precision that he wasn't accidentally sending objects through walls, and reading every book on magical theory he could find, because understanding the framework of a system before you operated inside it seemed like basic efficiency. Jean had helped with the first. She'd developed a drill where she'd throw something at him and he had to intercept it with the wand rather than the telekinesis, which was harder than it sounded because the instinct to use the mutation was faster and more natural, and the wand required a slightly different intention, a different quality of focus. He'd gotten good at it by the end of the 2nd week. And by the end of the third week, he'd started doing both simultaneously, and Jean had thrown a book at him out of respect and frustration in approximately equal measure. Charles had helped with the second. He'd contacted Dumbledore and acquired a reading list that went considerably beyond the standard first-year curriculum, and Harry had worked through it with the same focused attention he brought to the mutation work at Xavier's. Hank had read several of the more theoretical texts and asked questions that Harry couldn't fully answer yet, but that clarified what he was looking for. Logan drove him to King's Cross. Just Logan, Charles had offered. Scott had maneuvered himself into position to offer. Jean had not offered, but had made it extremely clear she intended to come. Logan had simply said, "I'll take him at breakfast that morning," and the matter had been settled with the finality of something that was never really negotiable. They stood on the pavement outside the station with Harry's trunk, a proper one, purchased in Diagon Alley during a second trip that had been deliberately uneventful, and Logan looked at the building and then at Harry. "You need anything," Logan said. "You call, I don't care what time it is." "I know," Harry said. "I mean it. 2 in the morning, you're having a problem, you call." "Logan, I know." Logan looked at him for another moment. He put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, the same gesture as the first night, the same weight. "Don't let anyone make you small," he said. "You understand me?" "Yes," Harry said. "Good." He picked up one end of the trunk. "Platform 9 3/4 then, which is genuinely an insane thing that I'm going to need a minute with." Platform 9 3/4 was everything the name implied and more. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet and enormous and generating enough steam to make the platform a series of soft-edged impressions. Groups of families, owls in cages, cats winding around legs. The specific high-pitched energy of children departing for something significant. Harry walked through it with Logan carrying one end of his trunk and felt the ambient magic of the platform like stepping into warm water, denser, more deliberate than Diagon Alley's casual accumulation. The enchantment maintaining the barrier between platforms was old and precisely engineered, and Harry mapped it automatically as he passed through it, the way he mapped everything. Several people saw him. He felt the recognition move through the platform the same way it had moved through the leaky cauldron, the older ones first, the ones who carried the war in their memories, and then the younger ones reacting to their parents' reactions. A woman in green robes put her hand over her mouth. A man stopped mid-sentence and stared. 2 children pointed and their father quietly lowered their hands. Harry walked to the train and loaded his trunk with assistance from a 6th-year boy who'd apparently decided on some instinctive basis that helping was the right thing to do and looked at Logan on the platform. "I'll be back at Christmas," Harry said. "You'd better be," Logan said. He looked at the train, he looked at Harry. "You've got the mirror?" "Yes." Charles had given him a 2-way mirror before he left. A magical artifact that could connect to its twin, which Charles kept on his desk. Harry had also been given a phone that Charles had Hank adapt to receive signal in places that should technically have been beyond range, which Hank had described as aggressively simple in a way that suggested it was considerably more complex than that. "Then go," Logan said, "before I decide I'm coming with you." Harry looked at him. "You'd last about 40 minutes at Hogwarts." "I'd last the exact right amount of time," Logan said. "Go." Harry went. He found a compartment 3 from the end, and stowed his trunk and sat by the window and watched Logan on the platform until the train curved away and the platform disappeared. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling and let himself have the 30 seconds of feeling the size of the thing he was doing. He was going to 2 schools simultaneously. He was carrying a piece of a dark wizard's soul in his forehead. He had a wand that was a brother to the wand that had killed his parents, and a mutation that made him functionally one of the most dangerous people in either world he was operating in, and he was 9 years old. He thought, all right, and meant it. The compartment door slid open. A girl looked in, bushy brown hair, bright brown eyes, the specific energy of someone who had done a very large amount of preparation and was eager to deploy it. She was carrying a book and had the slightly distracted air of someone who was thinking about what was in the book rather than where she was going. "Can I sit here?" she said. "Everywhere else is either full or there's a boy in the next compartment who's been doing magic and keeps hitting his toad, not intentionally, but sit down," Harry said. She sat, put the book open on her lap, and then looked at him properly for the first time. Her eyes went to his forehead, quick, involuntary, then visibly corrected. "Sorry," she said, "I didn't mean to stare." "It's fine," Harry said. "I'm Hermione Granger. Harry Potter." She nodded as if she'd already known and was confirming the information. "I read about you, in A History of Magic and the Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts and several other texts. They're rather contradictory in places." She paused. "I'm Muggle-born," she said in the tone of someone who had decided to front-load the information. "So I read everything I could before coming. I find it helps to be prepared." Harry looked at her. He felt her mind, without reaching, intelligent and quick and organized. with the particular shape of a person who trusted information above almost everything else. And underneath it a layer of anxiety she was clearly accustomed to managing. "I think being prepared is exactly the right instinct," he said. She looked at him as if she'd expected something slightly different from the boy who lived. "You don't mind that I'm Muggle-born? Why would I?" he said, and he meant it so straightforwardly that she blinked. "Some people here do," she said. "I've already been told, on the platform, someone with very blonde hair and a great deal of confidence in his own opinion." "I saw him in Diagon Alley," Harry said. "What did he say?" "That there are better students for Hogwarts than people who didn't grow up in the magical world." She said it with the clipped precision of someone quoting rather than editorializing. "I told him the evidence didn't support that since entrance to the school is based on magical ability and not parentage, and he told me I'd learn the difference. Then his father pulled him away." "You held your own," Harry said. "Of course I held my own," she said with the quiet certainty of someone who has been holding their own since they were old enough to understand that most rooms wouldn't do it for them. Harry looked at her for a moment. He thought she was probably going to be excellent. "What are you reading?" he said. She showed him. Intermediate Transfiguration, which was not on the first-year reading list. He reached into his bag and produced Advanced Theories of Transfiguration, which was even further off the first-year reading list, and she looked at it with an expression that was completely unguarded admiration. "Where did you get that?" she said. "My headmaster has an arrangement with the Hogwarts staff," Harry said. "I got an extended reading list." "Your headmaster?" She looked confused. "Dumbledore sent you a reading list." "Not Dumbledore," Harry said. "My other headmaster." Her expression reorganized. "You're already enrolled somewhere." "Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters in New York." He watched her process this. "I'm simultaneously enrolled there. Hogwarts is adjacent." Hermione looked at him with the specific expression of someone encountering new information that requires immediate reorganization of their understanding of the situation. "You're telling me that the boy who lived is a dual-enrolled transatlantic student?" "Yes," she thought about this. "That is," she said, "deeply unusual." "Most things about me are," Harry said. He opened his book. "We should probably use this time to read. It's a long journey." Hermione opened her book immediately, with the satisfaction of someone for whom we should read is the ideal social suggestion. They read for about 40 minutes before another compartment door opened, and things got considerably more interesting. The boy who came in was the blonde boy from Diagon Alley. He'd brought two others with him, large, with the slightly unfinished quality of boys who'd grown very fast and were still adjusting to the physics of their own bodies. The blonde boy looked at Harry with the same reconfigured attention he'd had in the alley, only more deliberate now, like he'd spent the intervening weeks deciding what to do with the information. "Potter," he said. "Draco Malfoy." He extended his hand in the formal way of someone who had been taught that a handshake was a transaction, not a greeting. Harry shook it. He felt brief, controlled, not intrusive, the shape of Draco Malfoy's mind, which was complicated in ways Harry didn't think the boy was fully aware of. Pride and intelligence and a deep, foundational anxiety underneath both that expressed itself as aggression. He'd felt that shape before in different people. "I saw you in Diagon Alley," Harry said. "You were with your father." Something moved in Draco's expression. "He had business there," he said. He glanced at Hermione. "You're sitting with a mudblood." The word landed in the compartment with the specific weight of something intended to wound. Harry looked at Draco. Not angrily, he felt anger like a passing cloud, present and then gone, with the flat, clear attention he gave to things that required addressing. "Don't say that," he said. Draco blinked. The boys behind him shifted. "I'm serious," Harry said. "Don't say it again. That word is a weapon and you're using it on someone who has done nothing to you, which tells me more about you than it does about her." He held Draco's eyes. "You're clearly not stupid, so you can choose better." Draco stared at him. There was something happening in his expression that Harry couldn't quite parse. Something between offense and genuine unsteadiness, as if the social landscape had rearranged beneath his feet. "You don't know anything about how this world works," Draco said. His voice had more edge than certainty. My parents were excellent people who are dead," Harry said pleasantly, "which is something I understand about my history. What I'm asking is whether you want this conversation to go well or badly, because right now it's going one direction and I'm giving you the chance to turn it around." Hermione, beside Harry, had put her book down. She was watching this with complete attention and carefully controlled expression. Draco looked at Harry for a long moment. The calculation happening behind his gray eyes was visible if you knew what you were looking for. He was reassessing, not changing his views, not yet, but filing information that didn't fit the framework he'd arrived with. "We'll be sorted tonight," he said, finally pulling back without quite conceding. "You'll see how things work." "I'm looking forward to it," Harry said. Draco left. The two large boys followed him. The door slid shut. Hermione looked at Harry. "He called me." "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry he did." "You didn't have to." "I know," Harry said again. "I wanted to." She looked at him for another moment with an expression that had shed all its initial wariness and replaced it with something more like decision. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "On this train. In this world." "So am I," Harry said. And he picked his book back up, and so did she. Hogwarts appeared out of the dark over the lake like something that had been waiting there long enough to become permanent. All towers and lit windows, and the particular authority of a place that had seen too much history to be impressed by any single moment of it. Harry stood in the prow of one of the small boats crossing the lake and looked at it, and felt, through the water, through the stone foundations beneath the water, through the accumulated centuries of magic saturating every surface, the castle's presence like a living thing. It was awake in some sense that had nothing to do with literal consciousness. It knew they were coming. It had been expecting them. Hermione was in the same boat, along with a nervous red-haired boy named Ron Weasley who had appeared in their compartment 2 hours into the journey, discovered he'd left his lunch in his owl's cage, been given half of Harry's sandwiches, and spent the subsequent hour being simultaneously grateful and starstruck in a way he was clearly trying to manage. He was funny without entirely meaning to be, and Harry liked him immediately in the straightforward way of people who don't perform being likable. "Is it always this big?" Ron said, looking at the castle. "Every year," said a nearby girl with the tone of someone who had older brothers and was therefore frequently in the position of having information that other people lacked. "It's bigger than I imagined," Hermione said. She was doing what Harry now recognized as her processing expression, absorbing information rapidly and reorganizing her existing framework to accommodate it. "It's older than it looks," Harry said. And then, "No, that's backwards. It looks exactly as old as it is." Ron looked at him. "You can tell how old it is." "I can feel the foundations through the water," Harry said. "The stone goes very deep." Ron opened his mouth and closed it again and visibly decided to file this as a thing he would ask about later, which Harry appreciated for its efficiency. The Great Hall was exactly what the phrase Great Hall implied and then exceeded it. The ceiling showed the night sky, not a painting, not a projection, but a sophisticated enchantment that Harry could feel the mechanism of, a vast sustained working of magic that had been maintained for centuries. The 4 long tables were full of older students who were all, without much subtlety, looking at the doors where the first years were filing in. The candles were hundreds. The professor's table at the head of the hall contained the faculty of Hogwarts, and Harry ran his eyes along it and identified Dumbledore immediately. He could feel the particular warmth and weight of that mind from across the hall, and identified 2 seats along a man who was watching Harry's entrance with an expression of such specific and concentrated intensity that it registered before Harry had fully processed the face. Thin, black robes, black hair. A face that was composed into careful neutrality, but was doing significant work to maintain it. Dark eyes that were sharp and rapid in their assessment. Harry felt his mind brief, not intrusive, just the passive awareness he carried everywhere and got. Complicated grief buried under controlled intelligence, buried under something that was almost anger but wasn't quite. Something personal, something that was not going to be simple. He filed it, continued into the hall. The sorting hat was placed on a stool in front of the first years and sang its song, which was a more interesting piece of work than it appeared. Harry could feel the magic in it, the centuries of accumulated observation woven into the fabric of the thing, and it was paying attention to the assembled students with the specific attention of something designed to do exactly this. Names were called alphabetically. Harry watched each sorting and read the room, the genuine pleasure at Gryffindor calls from the table on the left, the polite acknowledgement from Slytherin on the right, the moment when Hermione Granger went to Gryffindor and looked briefly, privately triumphant as she walked to the table. Ron Weasley, 3 names later, went to Gryffindor with the relief of someone who had been worried about a foregone conclusion. Potter Harry, the hall went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a name being called. The specific quiet of 500 people simultaneously redirecting their full attention toward a single point. Harry walked to the stool and sat down, and the hat was placed on his head, and then from inside the hat he heard a voice. "Well," said the hat, "here's something I've never encountered." "I'd expect that's true," Harry said internally with the ease of someone accustomed to telepathic communication. The hat paused. "You can hear me clearly. You're projecting very clearly. You have a strong signal." "In 800 years of sorting students," the hat said, "you're the first one to critique my broadcasting." Something in the voice that was almost amusement. "Let me look at you," Harry let it. He lowered the walls slightly, not entirely, not the deep architecture that protected the fragment in his scar, but enough for genuine contact. He felt the hat move through his mind with surprising delicacy for something that presented as a worn piece of headgear, touching things briefly, taking the shape of what it found. "Remarkable," it said quietly. "Both kinds, fully both kinds, yes, and the other thing, yes, that must be difficult." "I've had it my whole life," Harry said. "It's just part of the landscape." The hat was quiet for a moment. I'll tell you what I tell every student, which is that I see the qualities in you, and I will tell you where they're best suited. But I suspect in your case the choice is somewhat more complex. I'm not complex, Harry said. I know what I am. Tell me then. I want to learn, Harry said. Everything. I want to understand both worlds I'm part of. I want to face what's coming with actual knowledge rather than hope. And I want to be around people who aren't afraid of what I can do. That could be several houses. You know which one, Harry said. I could feel it when the others were sorted. The quality of each table. Gryffindor isn't the bravest. They're the most willing to move toward what scares them. That's not the same thing. No, the hat agreed. It's not. A pause. Encourage specifically your kind, the kind that moves without fear because it has assessed the situation rather than suppressed the emotion. That is Gryffindor's best version of itself. The kind they aspire to. Then you already know, Harry said. Yes, the hat said, I do. And then aloud, loud enough for the whole hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked to it through the noise and sat down across from Hermione, who was beaming, and beside Ron, who shook his hand with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been hoping for exactly this and hadn't wanted to say so. Down the table, the older Gryffindors were leaning in, passing the name along, the information rippling outward. At the head of the hall, Dumbledore caught Harry's eye and inclined his head. Harry nodded back. He felt, from the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy looking at him. The expression there was harder to read than it had been on the train, not anger, not relief, something more like recalibration happening in real time. And from the professor's table, the dark-eyed man, Harry checked the seat placement against the information Dumbledore had provided before term. Severus Snape was looking at him, with an expression that had shifted from the guarded intensity of earlier into something quieter and more private. Something that was happening below the level of his professional composure. Harry looked back steadily. He didn't look away first. Neither did Snape. The feast appeared and disappeared in the way of very good meals at which you are simultaneously hungry and distracted by the company, and then Professor McGonagall, tartan precise, carrying the specific authority of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to command a room, led the first years up through the castle. The staircases moved. Harry tracked this with the spatial awareness he carried everywhere, updating his internal map of the castle as they went, floors, corridors, the places where the magical architecture wasn't quite aligned with the physical architecture, which was more frequent than you'd think and very interesting. The moving staircases were enchanted in a way that was more sophisticated than they looked. There was an intelligence to the movement, a logic to where they went and when. They don't always go the same way, Ron told him, navigating with the confidence of someone who'd heard about this extensively. Fred and George say you have to just keep walking and eventually you get where you need to go. That's not quite right, Harry said, watching the next staircase begin to rotate. He felt the mechanism, reached for it the way he reached for anything mechanical and held it. The staircase stopped rotating. He stepped on, walked up, stepped off. Behind him, the staircase resumed its rotation with a slight grumble of something that had been briefly overridden. Ron stared at him. How did you do that? I asked it nicely, Harry said. That's not, can you do that with all of them? I think so. Ron turned to the boy behind him, a round-faced boy named Neville who had been anxious since the boats and had relaxed incrementally during the feast and was now hovering somewhere around cautiously optimistic. Did you see that? Ron said. Yes, Neville said in a voice that suggested he was still processing it. Cool, Ron said, with the simplicity of someone who had decided that this was the correct response and intended to stick with it. The dormitory was at the top of Gryffindor Tower and had 5 beds, and the smell of old stone and the sound of wind against the windows. Harry put his things down on the bed nearest the window, not because anyone had assigned it, but because it felt right, and sat on the edge of it and looked at the room. His roommates Ron, Neville, a boy named Dean who was tall and quiet and had already staked a comfortable claim on the bed farthest from the door, and a boy named Seamus who had come in speaking at some speed about a spell he'd tried on his own luggage that had partially transformed it into a badger, were settling in with the organized chaos of 5 people in a new space. Harry took the two-way mirror out of his bag. He set it face up on the nightstand. In it, he could see the reflection of the ceiling, and then the reflection shifted and Charles's face was there, in the steady, slightly formal way of a man who had been waiting for contact but was not going to show it. How was it? Charles said. Gryffindor, Harry said. As expected, Charles smiled. I had no doubt. The castle is extraordinary, psychically and physically. It's the most densely enchanted place I've ever been. More than Gringotts? Different. Gringotts is fortified. Hogwarts is inhabited. The magic here is woven into everything. It feels like it's still growing. He paused. I can feel the whole castle when I concentrate. He looked for the word. It's like the school itself is a system, like Cerebro. Charles was quiet for a moment. Be careful with that, he said, not as a warning, more as a practical note. If the castle can feel you reaching, it may respond. It already has, Harry said. I held one of the moving staircases still, a brief pause, and it worked. The castle noticed. It didn't object. He paused. I think it knows I'm here, not sentient exactly, but aware. Castles that are more than castles, Charles said. We'll add it to the list of things to understand properly. How's Jean? She destroyed 4 training dummies yesterday and declared the danger room inadequate. She and Scott have been in a constructive argument about it ever since. He paused. She sends her regards. Logan says to tell you not to start any wars without him. Harry felt something in his chest that was warm and specific and slightly aching, in the way that caring about a place makes you feel when you're not in it. I'll do my best, he said. He set the mirror down after Charles signed off and lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling, and began methodically to map the castle in his head, corridors, rooms, the warm nodes of magic clustered at specific points. The cold point deep in the dungeons that he wasn't going to ignore. The complex moving architecture of the staircases. Around him, his roommates were talking. Ron and Seamus about Quidditch. Dean about a comic he'd brought. Neville was already in bed, reading something with the focused peace of someone who had found his way to the activity that made him most comfortable. Harry let the conversation move around him and felt the castle and thought about the dark-eyed man at the faculty table and the thing he'd felt underneath Snape's composure. The grief, the personal history, whatever connected this man's expression to Harry's face in a way that didn't seem purely professional. He was going to find out. That was simply going to happen. The first classes were Transfiguration and Potions, which happened to represent the 2 professors Harry was most immediately interested in observing, for reasons that had nothing to do with the curriculum. Transfiguration first. McGonagall turned herself from a cat into a professor with the kind of matter-of-fact ease that establishes dominance over a room more completely than any formal announcement, and then set the first years to turning matchsticks into needles. The principle was straightforward. You held the image of the target object in your mind with specific clarity, imposed it through the wand, and let the magic translate intention into reality. Harry tried it. The matchstick became a needle on the first attempt. He tried it with the telekinesis engaged simultaneously, which he hadn't planned to do, and the needle became a different thing entirely, a length of bright silver that was not quite metal and not quite light and that hummed at the frequency of his mutation, which was not what the exercise had asked for. He pulled it back. Matchstick, start again. This time he kept the 2 systems separate, kept the telekinesis carefully offline, used only the wand and the magic, and the matchstick became a needle, clean and silver and perfectly ordinary. McGonagall appeared at his elbow. She looked at the needle. She looked at the brief, subtle glow that had preceded it, which she would not have been able to see unless she was looking for it, and which suggested she'd been watching him more carefully than she'd appeared. Again, she said. He did it again. Matchstick to needle, clean and fast. Now the other way, she said. She said it without looking at anyone else, very quietly, directly to him. Harry looked at the needle. He reached for the telekinesis, not the wand, and felt the needle's material structure, the density of the metal, the molecular arrangement, and pushed it back to its original state. Matchstick lying on the desk, slightly warm. McGonagall looked at this for a moment. Then she said in the same quiet voice, "You'll come by my office at 4 on Thursday. We have some specific areas to discuss." She moved on. Hermione beside him had successfully turned her matchstick into a needle and was regarding Harry with an expression that said she had many questions and was exercising significant restraint in not asking all of them simultaneously. "How did you do it backwards?" she said. "Felt the original structure and restored it," Harry said. "But that's," she stopped. "That's not magic, is it?" "Not entirely," Harry said. "You can do things without the wand," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." She looked at her matchstick, then at him, then at her matchstick again, and he could feel her reorganizing again, the rapid, systematic restructuring of her understanding that he was coming to recognize as one of her most distinctive qualities. "You're going to be very difficult to study with," she said, "because you make me want to know everything at once." "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me today," Harry said, and turned back to his work. Potions was in the dungeons, which were cold and smelled of things that were mostly identifiable and occasionally weren't. And they were there at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon with the Slytherins, which meant Draco Malfoy was at the table across the aisle looking at Harry with the same calculating assessment he'd been directing at him since the train. Snape came in without preamble or performance, and the room went quiet immediately, which told Harry a great deal about how this man taught. He stood at the front and looked at the assembled students with the expression of someone doing a rapid and not particularly charitable assessment of the raw material before him, and then his eyes found Harry. "Potter," he said. His voice was smooth and deliberate with the quality of someone who had learned to use words as instruments. "Our new celebrity." The room temperature dropped slightly. Not literally, but the social temperature, the ambient expectation, compressed toward whatever was coming. "Tell me," Snape said, "what I would get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood." Harry had read the potion's text extensively. He also felt in the question something that was not purely academic. There was a specificity to the choice of ingredients, a precision that read less like a test and more like a message to someone who might understand the reference. Asphodel, wormwood, both associated with death in different traditions. "Draught of living death," Harry said, "one of the most powerful sleeping potions known, extraordinarily difficult to brew correctly." Snape looked at him. Something moved briefly in his expression, too fast to categorize. "Where would you find a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's an antidote to most poisons. The difference between monkshood and wolfsbane, there isn't one. Same plant, two names, also called aconite." Snape looked at him for a moment that was longer than the question warranted. The rest of the class had the stillness of students watching a social dynamic they couldn't quite read. "Adequate," Snape said. He turned to the blackboard. Harry looked at the back of his head and felt, through the ambient awareness he carried everywhere, the shape of what was underneath the composure. The grief was specific and old, not raw but calcified, built around. The anger was directed inward as much as outward. And underneath all of it, something Harry was going to need more information to understand. When Snape had looked at him, the emotional signature had contained both recognition and something that was almost pain, old pain encountering something that revived it. His mother, Harry thought, the brilliant witch Dumbledore had described. This man had known her, possibly known her well. And now he was looking at her son and seeing her face, and that was not going to be simple for either of them. Harry looked at his cauldron and began the day's work and said nothing about any of this, and stored it carefully in the architecture of his mind. The common room that evening was warm and crowded and smelled of old wood, and the specific combination of damp robes and fireplace that Harry was already beginning to associate with belonging to this particular house. He sat in a chair near the fire and wrote letters, one to Charles with observations about the castle and the day, one to Logan that was shorter and more specific, one to Jean that was mostly about the transfiguration exercise and its implications. Hermione sat across from him, already working through the homework that had been assigned, which she was completing with the focused intensity of someone who had found the activity genuinely pleasurable and was not performing diligence. Ron sat nearby, doing his homework with less focus and more sighing, pausing periodically to ask Hermione clarifying questions that she answered without quite making him feel inadequate about needing to ask, which Harry thought was a skill. Neville was learning, with help from Hermione, the wand movement for the switching spell they'd been shown that morning. He had the same gentle, careful patience with his own learning that he'd shown in the boats, and Harry watched him work and thought that this was someone who'd been told he was slow often enough that he'd believed it, which was a very specific kind of damage that Harry recognized with the recognition of someone who'd had a different version of it done to them. "You're holding it too tight," Harry said to Neville. Neville stopped, looked at him. "Sorry. The wand, you're gripping it like it might escape. Try loosening up 3 fingers instead of 4. Neville adjusted, did the movement. The small object he was supposed to be switching jumped 2 inches. "That's better," Harry said. Neville looked at the object, at his wand, back at Harry. "How did you know? When you hold something too tightly, you're adding your own tension to the spell. Magic needs a little room to breathe." He paused. "Someone told me something like that about telekinesis back home." "Where's home?" Neville asked. "New York," Harry said. "A school there." "You went to school in New York?" Ron said, looking up from his homework with the full attention of someone who has found something considerably more interesting than the switching spell. "I still do," Harry said. Simultaneously. Ron absorbed this with the adaptability of someone who had grown up in a household where reality was frequently flexible. "Cool," he said, using the word with the same uncomplicated decision he'd used it with on the staircase, and went back to his homework. Harry looked at the fire and listened to the common room and felt the castle around him, its warm, accumulated presence, the magic in the stone like a deep, slow heartbeat. He let himself inhabit both things at once, the room and the scale of the building, the immediate warmth and the vast depth of it. His wand was in his pocket and his mutation was present, and both of them ran together the way rivers run together, and he realized, sitting in a chair in a castle in Scotland with 3 people who were going to be important to him, and he was not small. He had not been small since the moment Charles Xavier found him in a garden in Surrey. He had simply needed someone to look at him and see the actual shape of him. Outside the tower windows, the Scottish sky was doing its dark, serious business with the stars, and somewhere below in the dungeons, in the small private office of a complicated man, Severus Snape was sitting alone with something that had been sitting with him for a very long time, and had arrived at the dinner table today wearing a dead woman's face. And in the Slytherin dormitory, a blonde boy was lying on his back staring at the ceiling, thinking about a spell that had stopped in midair and rotated like a leaf in still water, and about the calm, direct, totally unbothered face of the person who had stopped it, and about everything he'd been taught to expect from the boy who lived, which had turned out to be comprehensively wrong. The castle breathed around all of them, patient and old and deeply, fully aware. Harry closed his eyes and let himself feel the whole building at once, all of it, every room and corridor and enchantment and sleeping student and thought. I'm going to need to know every part of you. The castle in its way said, I know. Chapter 6. The shape of war. It came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. Harry was asleep, which was unusual. He slept lightly and woke easily, the way people do when they've spent years in environments where sleeping too deeply had costs. But the castle had been doing something with the ambient magic that evening, a slow, settled warmth that had pressed down on the dormitory like a hand on a child's back, and Harry had gone under completely. So when it came, it arrived into sleep rather than into waking, and that made it different. The cold was the first thing. The specific cold of the frequency he'd always carried, the dark thread in the scar warming to something more active like a coal that had been gray and suddenly isn't. And then behind the cold a presence, not the vague, dormant signal he'd lived alongside for 9 years, something deliberate, something that had found the thread and pulled it. In the dream, or the thing that was wearing a dream's clothes, he was standing in a forest. Not any forest he recognized. The trees were wrong, the light was wrong, and the wrongness had a specific quality. As if whoever was constructing the space had an idea of what a forest looked like, but had built it from memory rather than experience. A figure stood between the trees. No face. Not darkness exactly, more like the absence of a face, the place where a face should have been filled with something that moved without moving. The presence of it was enormous and cold and furious in the specific way of something that had been enormous and then diminished and had not made peace with the diminishment. It said, Harry Potter, not aloud, not through ears. Directly, the way telepathic contact felt, except this was not telepathy, it was the scar thread, the fragment using the channel it had always had. Harry felt it the way you feel someone open a door from the other side. He said, still in the dream, still in the constructed forest, Voldemort. The presence shifted. Something that was not surprise but was adjacent to it, the specific quality of a thing that is expected to find a small, frightened animal and found something that was looking back. You know my name, it said. Dumbledore told me, Harry said, and I could feel you. I've always been able to feel you. You're in my scar. He kept his voice, his dream voice, the voice that was thought rather than sound, completely level. That was your mistake, not mine. I didn't put you there. The presence moved toward him, which was not movement but the sensation of something becoming more immediate, more present, the temperature dropping further. You are very small, it said, with the contempt of something that had once been feared by entire nations and was now still trying to remember how that felt. Yes, Harry said, I'm 9, give me a few years. He felt the scar heating. He did not flinch from it. He felt the fragment in it, the piece of Voldemort that had lodged itself in him at his parents' death. And he felt that piece reaching toward its source, toward the weakened consciousness on the other end of the thread, straining with the neediness of a thing that wanted to be whole. Harry reached back, not toward Voldemort, toward the fragment in his own head. He'd been feeling its shape for weeks, since Dumbledore had named it, since he'd started consciously mapping what it was rather than just accepting its presence. He'd been doing what he always did with things he was going to need to deal with. He'd been studying it, understanding the structure, learning the grain of it. And now, with the connection active, with Voldemort pulling on the thread, he had something he hadn't had before. He had access to both ends. He pushed into the connection not his thoughts, not his vulnerability, but his awareness, his psychic presence, the thing that made Cerebro light up and made Jean's eyes go wide, and let it run down the thread in the direction Voldemort had come from, and then he looked. What he found was small. Diminished to a degree that made the terror of the name Voldemort feel suddenly like a very large shadow cast by a very small object. The consciousness on the other end of the scar was genuine and ancient and deeply, viciously intelligent, but it was also barely there. A candle in a very large dark room. Whatever had happened when his mother died, whatever rebound had occurred, it had taken most of what Voldemort was and scattered it so completely that what remained was barely coherent. And it knew Harry could see it, and it was afraid. Interesting, Harry said. He kept his voice level because it was genuinely interesting, and because the level voice was the most destabilizing thing available. You're barely there. The presence surged, anger bright and violent, the emotion more substantial than the consciousness behind it, and something struck the scar like a physical blow. Harry felt the pain arrive and acknowledged it and didn't let it move him. He'd had the scar his entire life. It had hurt before. He pushed back, not violently, not with the telekinesis or the wand or the mutation's raw output. He pushed back with the same thing he used when he built his psychic walls, the architecture of himself. The careful, self-constructed framework of a mind that had been its own protector since before it had a name for what it was doing. He put himself between Voldemort and the fragment in his scar, and he made the boundary absolutely clear, and then he said, "Don't come here again unless you're ready for this to go badly for you." The connection severed, Harry woke up. He was sitting upright in bed with his hand pressed to his forehead and the scar burning in a clean, specific way that was different from its dormant warmth. Around him, the dormitory was completely quiet. Ron was asleep, Neville was asleep, Dean and Seamus were asleep. The fire in the grate had burned down to red-orange coals. Harry sat with his hand on his scar and did a systematic check of himself. The fragment was still there, quieter now, the connection closed. His own mind felt large, expanded, the way a space feels after something that was pressing on it from outside has backed away. He reached for the two-way mirror on his nightstand. Charles's face appeared before Harry had finished the activation word, which meant Charles had been awake and watching. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there during their last call. "I felt it," Charles said. His voice was very controlled. "Through Cerebro, something contacted you." "Voldemort," Harry said, "through the scar connection." "Are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "He's Charles, he's barely there. Whatever happened when he tried to kill me, it didn't just weaken him, it took most of what he was. He's holding together with intention and anger and not much else." He paused. "I pushed back." Charles was quiet for a moment. "Tell me exactly what happened." Harry did. He described the dream forest, the contact, the quality of Voldemort's presence, the moment he'd reached down the thread and looked at what was on the other end. He described what he'd found with the calm specificity he brought to assessments. And he watched Charles's expression move through several things without settling on any of them. "You used the connection as a channel," Charles said. "You ran your own awareness down it." "Yes, he would have felt that. He did, that's why he left." Another pause. "Harry, what you just did, reading a consciousness through a psychic link that was actively being used against you while you were asleep and then using that same link to make your position clear," Charles stopped. "How much of that was deliberate?" "Most of it was instinct in the moment," Harry said. "But I've been studying the fragment for weeks. I knew its shape. When he activated it from the outside, I just extended what I already knew." "Extending what you already knew," Charles repeated very quietly. "Is that wrong?" "No," Charles said. "It's extraordinary, and it raises questions about what you're capable of that I'm still working through." He leaned forward. "I'm coming." "You don't need to." "I'm coming," Charles said. "Not because I think you're in danger, clearly that ship has sailed, but because this situation has moved into territory that requires more than mirror calls." His voice was firm and warm simultaneously. "I'll contact Dumbledore. We need to talk about the fragment properly, all three of us together." "All right," Harry said. "Are you going back to sleep?" Harry considered the dormitory, the quiet, the coal-orange glow of the dying fire. "Yes," he said. "I have transfiguration at 8. Charles looked at him for a moment with the expression Harry had come to think of as the "I am not sure how to fully account for you" expression, which was one of his favorites. "Good night, Harry." "Good night," Harry said. He set the mirror down and lay back and looked at the ceiling and let the castle close around him, its warm, deep, enchanted presence, the stone and magic and accumulated centuries, and felt peripherally the fragment in his scar sitting very quietly. He addressed it the way he'd address anything in his own mind. Settle down, it settled, he slept. By morning, the scar had faded to its usual background presence, and Harry went to transfiguration and herbology and lunch in the Great Hall with the compartmentalized efficiency of someone who had decided that the previous night was real and significant and could be processed in parallel with eating. He told Hermione at lunch. Not everything, not the full detail of what he'd done to Voldemort's consciousness, because that required more context than a Tuesday meal could hold. But the contact. The scar, the general shape of it. She put her fork down and gave him her full, undivided attention, which from Hermione was a significant offer. "You were contacted telepathically through your scar by a fragmented dark wizard while you were asleep," she said. "Yes. And you're eating a sandwich." "I'm hungry," Harry said, "and he's gone, I made sure of that." Hermione looked at him with an expression that Harry was learning to read as Hermione recalibrating her world at speed. "You made sure of that," she said. "How?" "I pushed back," Harry said. "He wasn't expecting it." "Because most people wouldn't know how," she said. "And those who did would likely be too frightened to attempt it." "I wasn't frightened," Harry said. "I know," she said. She said it like the fact itself was the most important part of the sentence. "That's Harry, you need to tell someone, a professor." "I've told Professor Xavier," Harry said. "He's coming and Dumbledore will be told." Ron, who had been listening since about the third sentence while pretending to concentrate on his lunch, said, "There's a bit of Voldemort in your head." He said the name with the deliberate effort of someone who had decided upon reflection that Harry had a point about fear and names. "A fragment," Harry said. "Has been since I was a baby." "And you just told it to settle down, more or less." Ron absorbed this. "Right," he said then, "can you pass the pumpkin juice?" Harry passed the pumpkin juice and felt something in his chest that was warm and slightly ridiculous, which was what Ron Weasley's uncomplicated acceptance tended to produce. Across the Great Hall at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him with an expression Harry couldn't read from this distance. He felt the direction of the attention without turning to meet it and filed it without acting on it. At the faculty table, Snape was not looking at him. He was looking at his plate with the specific deliberateness of someone choosing where to look. Charles arrived at Hogsmeade Station on Thursday evening in the school's second car. Logan had apparently insisted on driving rather than portkeying, which meant an arrangement had been made with magical transport authorities that Harry suspected had taken the better part of 2 days to negotiate. Dumbledore met them at the gates, which was a diplomatic acknowledgement Harry appreciated. The three of them, Charles, Dumbledore, and Harry, met in Dumbledore's office, which was circular and inhabited by sleeping portraits and spinning silver instruments and a bird that turned out to be a phoenix, sitting on its perch with the equanimity of something that was used to being in rooms where significant things happened. The phoenix looked at Harry with an intelligent orange eye. Harry looked back. The bird made a low, warm sound that wasn't quite music and settled its wings. "Fox," Dumbledore said, noting this exchange with visible interest. "He doesn't warm to everyone." "I can feel what he is," Harry said. He recognized it. Dumbledore and Charles looked at each other. Harry let them do it. "Tell me about Tuesday night," Dumbledore said, and sat down behind his desk with his fingers steepled and his eyes sharp and his whole enormous careful mind turned toward Harry with a focus that felt different from the first meeting, less strategic. "More urgent," Harry told him. Same account he'd given Charles, with more detail about the quality of Voldemort's consciousness, the diminishment, the specificity of what remained, the way the anger was more intact than the intelligence because emotion calcified differently than structured thought. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which took visible effort. When Harry finished, the headmaster was quiet for a long moment. "The fragment in your scar," he said. "You used it as an observation point." "A two-way channel," Harry said. "He opened it, I used what he opened." "And what you found?" Dumbledore paused, choosing his words with the care of someone for whom precision was a tool as much as language. "The description you're giving matches my own assessment of Voldemort's current state, which I have reached through years of careful investigation." He looked at Harry. "You reached the same conclusion in 30 seconds through a dream." "I had a direct connection," Harry said, "and I know what diminished consciousness feels like. Charles taught me what to look for." Charles, in his chair beside Harry, said, "The fragment, Albus, we need to discuss it properly." "Yes," Dumbledore said. He leaned back. He looked, for the first time in any of Harry's interactions with him, genuinely tired, not physically, but the deeper tiredness of someone who has been carrying a specific weight for a long time and is approaching the moment of setting it down. "What I'm about to tell you, Harry, I had intended to tell you much later, at a point where the context would be more established." "Tell me now," Harry said. He said it the same way he'd said it in Charles's sitting room 2 months and a world ago. Dumbledore this time didn't hesitate. "The fragment in your scar is a piece of Voldemort's soul," he said. "The magical world has a term for an object that contains a piece of a soul, a Horcrux. Voldemort created several over the years as a method of achieving immortality. Splitting his soul and anchoring the pieces to objects ensures that as long as any piece survives, he cannot truly die." Harry was quiet. He was processing. "The fragment in my scar," he said. "He didn't intend to put it there." "No," Dumbledore said. "The rebounding of his own curse, the force of your mother's sacrifice, it tore a piece of him away and the nearest available anchor was the only living thing in the room." He paused. "You. So I'm a Horcrux," Harry said. The word landed in the room. Charles went very still. Fox made the soft sound again. "Unintentionally," Dumbledore said, "and the distinction matters enormously. The others were created deliberately. You were an accident of extraordinary violence." "And the original plan," Harry said, "the one you've been running, the one Voldemort eventually needs to be permanently killed." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "I was supposed to die." The silence was so complete that Harry could hear the spinning of the silver instruments on Dumbledore's shelves. "In the version I had planned," Dumbledore said, "yes. At a specific moment when Voldemort's other Horcruxes had been destroyed, you would have needed to allow the fragment to be destroyed. The curse would have taken it and left you if we were fortunate and if the same sacrificial magic that saved you as an infant could be invoked again." He met Harry's eyes. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like the plan," Harry said, "required me to walk toward my own death without knowing I was doing it. Because you were afraid I wouldn't if I knew." Dumbledore said nothing, which was itself an answer. Charles spoke very quietly. "That's not a plan we're implementing." "I know," Dumbledore said, and the exhaustion in those 2 words was genuine, the exhaustion of a man who has known for some time that a plan he'd constructed was wrong and has not yet found the alternative. Harry sat with the information. He turned it over. He applied what he actually knew, not what he'd been told to feel about it, not the fear or grief or betrayal he might reasonably have performed, but what he actually knew, which was the fragment in his scar was real and destructible. The question was whether the destruction required his death or whether that conclusion had been reached by a man working with incomplete information. Has anyone else examined the fragment directly? Harry said. No one else has had access to it, Dumbledore said. Then the conclusion is based on theory, Harry said. Well-founded theory, Harry said. Based on how Horcruxes normally work applied to a situation that isn't normal. He looked at Charles. I've been studying it for weeks. The grain of it, the way it sits in my mind, it doesn't feel like my mind. It feels like a graft, like something attached to my psychic architecture from outside. He turned back to Dumbledore. When I pushed Voldemort away through the connection on Tuesday, I was between him and the fragment, my mind between him and his own peace. And it held. The fragment didn't move toward him, it stayed. Because you held it, Charles said slowly. Because I can hold it, Harry said, which means it responds to my control. Which means it may not require my death, it may require me to be stronger than it is, to cut it off from its source completely, to sever the thread. Dumbledore stared at him, not with the recalibrating look of the sitting room, not with the headmaster's careful management, with genuine, unprepared astonishment. You're describing psychic surgery on a fragment of a dark wizard's soul, Charles said. I'm describing something I already started on Tuesday without knowing it, Harry said. When I put myself between him and the fragment, when I made the boundary and he retreated, he looked at his hands. I need to understand the fragment completely. Its structure, its connection points, how it attaches to my psychic architecture. And then I need to remove it the way you remove something that's been grafted in without permission. Carefully, completely. Harry, Dumbledore said, his voice was very careful. What you're suggesting has never been attempted. Most things I do haven't been attempted, Harry said. That's not a reason not to try. Charles looked at him for a long moment. Harry met the look. He felt Charles doing what he sometimes did, not reading, not intrusive, but present, assessing, taking the full measure of the thing in front of him. We study it first, Charles said, completely. We don't attempt anything until we understand every part of the process, and we do it together. He looked at Dumbledore. I want your best knowledge of Horcrux mechanics, everything, not the version edited for a child's consumption. Dumbledore looked at Harry, at Charles, at the Phoenix, who had nothing to say about any of this and appeared to consider that the correct response. Then everything, he agreed. Yes. Logan was waiting outside Dumbledore's office when Harry came out, because Logan was always exactly where he needed to be, with the uncanny spatial awareness of a man who had been navigating dangerous situations for longer than most people could imagine. He looked at Harry. How bad, he said. Complicated, Harry said, but manageable. Logan studied his face. You don't look like someone who just found out something bad. I found out something that was going to be presented as catastrophic at a point when I was supposed to be unable to think clearly about it, Harry said. Presented now, before that point, it's just a problem. Problems have solutions. Logan was quiet for a moment. What problem? The thing in my scar is a piece of Voldemort's soul. It's called a Horcrux. Dumbledore's original plan required me to die to destroy it. Harry paused. I don't think that's necessary. I think I can remove it myself with enough preparation. Logan looked at him for a very long time. Charles agrees, Harry said. We're going to study it properly first. And Dumbledore? Dumbledore is updating his thinking, Harry said. He's good at it actually, he just needed someone to make the case. Logan leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling. He did this for about 10 seconds, then he looked back at Harry. You negotiated your way out of a prophecy-based death sentence at 9 years old, he said. I haven't negotiated my way out of anything yet, Harry said. I've identified an alternative approach that requires significant work. That's different. Right, Logan said. He pushed off the wall. I'm staying through the weekend. I thought you might, Harry said. Mrs. Hudson sent food with you, didn't she? She sent an unreasonable quantity of food, Logan said, and a note for Professor Dumbledore about dietary considerations that I was specifically told to deliver in person. Harry felt the warm, ridiculous thing in his chest again. Come on, he said. I'll take you to the Great Hall. Dinner's in 20 minutes. The castle at dinner time was the version of itself that Harry liked best. Alive with the specific noise of many people eating and talking and existing in close proximity without requiring it to mean anything formal. He walked into the Great Hall with Logan at his shoulder and felt 500 people register the arrival of a large man with impressive arms and the look of someone who had, at some point in his life, fought things significantly larger than himself, and then register that this person was with Harry Potter, and then settle into the particular Hogwarts equilibrium of, well, obviously. He sat at the Gryffindor table. Logan sat beside him, filling more space on the bench than seemed geometrically justifiable. Hermione, across the table, looked at Logan with the expression of someone encountering new information and beginning to cross-reference it. Hermione Granger, Harry said, "This is Logan. He's from my other school." "Mr. Logan," Hermione said. "Just Logan," Logan said. He looked at the food. He picked up a piece of bread. "Are you a mutant?" Hermione said, directly without preamble in exactly the way she asked every question she actually wanted the answer to. Logan looked at her. "Yeah, that's genuinely fascinating," she said. "The intersection of mutant genetics and magical ability is almost completely unstudied. Harry is probably the first documented case of significant ability in both areas. The literature is—" She stopped. "Sorry, I'm told I do that." "Do what?" Logan said. "Become academic about things that are also personal." "Don't apologize for it," Logan said. "Beats the alternative." Hermione blinked. Then she smiled, the real one, the one that appeared when she wasn't managing an impression. "Yes," she said, "it does." Ron leaned forward from Logan's other side. "Can I ask what you can do?" he said, "as a mutant." "I know Harry can do telepathy and telekinesis, and he stopped a spell in Diagon Alley with his hand, which he told me about and which is brilliant. But what?" Logan put 3 claws through the table surface, left them there for 1 second, retracted them. The table was unmarked. Ron stared at the unmarked surface with wide eyes. "The claws go through," he said, "and the table is fine." "Other way around," Logan said. "I go through and heal, table's just a side effect." "That's," Ron said, "extremely metal." "Literally," Neville said from Ron's other side, and then looked surprised at himself. Harry looked down the table and felt the texture of the evening. Logan occupying his specific space with his specific immovable quality. Hermione already pivoting from the Horcrux information she didn't yet have back toward the academic thread she'd found with Logan, Ron, and Neville doing the easy, comfortable thing they did. The castle warm and full and moving around all of it. He looked at the faculty table. Snape was looking at Logan with an expression of comprehensive assessment. Logan, without appearing to look, had clearly already done the same. Dumbledore beside Snape caught Harry's eye and raised his goblet very slightly. Harry nodded back. McGonagall, on Dumbledore's other side, was watching Harry with the expression she'd had since the Thursday office meeting. Not the standard professor's assessment, but something more specific. As if she was revising a document she'd thought was complete, and finding that several key paragraphs needed to be rewritten. After dinner, Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower while Logan went to whatever guest arrangement Dumbledore had provided, and he sat in the common room chair by the fire and took the compass out of his pocket. The needle was pointing, as it often did, toward the window and the grounds, toward the direction of Hogsmeade Station, toward the road that led away from Hogwarts in the direction of London and the school in Westchester, and the people who had become the fixed points of his life in the space of 3 months. He held the compass and thought about the night's information, turning it over the way he turned everything systematically without panic, looking for the structure of it. A Horcrux, his death in Dumbledore's original plan. A plan built on incomplete information about what Harry was, because when Dumbledore made the plan, Harry had been a 1-year-old with a lightning bolt scar, and he'd been placed in a cupboard on Privet Drive, and the plan had not been substantially updated since. The plan had not accounted for Charles Xavier finding him first. Had not accounted for 3 years, 3 months, even, of training with people who treated his power as a thing to be understood rather than managed. Had not accounted for what it meant to have a 9-year-old who had spent 8 years building his own psychic architecture, who had been living alongside a fragment of Voldemort's soul with such intimacy that he knew its grain the way you know the texture of something you've been carrying in your pocket for years. He thought about what he'd told Dumbledore. "Most things I do haven't been attempted." He'd meant it, and he meant it now. The plan assumed he was ordinary. He had never been ordinary, not even in the cupboard on Privet Drive, where he'd moved bean plants with his mind and heard people's feelings like radio signals and known, in the way of children who trust their own experience over the official version, that what he was couldn't be contained by a small dark room. What he was going to do about the Horcrux was not yet fully clear. What was clear was that it was going to be on his terms, at his pace, with his people around him, and that the alternative, the sacrificial walk toward a death designed by someone who didn't know what he actually was simply not going to happen. He put the compass away. Hermione came and sat in the other chair by the fire, bringing a book and a slight awkwardness that resolved quickly when she said, without looking up, "Are you going to tell me about tonight?" "How much do you want to know?" Harry said. "Everything," she said, "obviously," he told her. He watched her face as he did, the rapid processing, the reorganization, the moment when the Horcrux information landed and she went briefly very still and then started thinking at a speed that was almost visible. She didn't interrupt. She waited until he finished and then she sat very quiet for about 30 seconds, which from Hermione was an extended meditation. The psychic surgery approach, she said. Removing the fragment yourself. Yes, do you know how yet? Not completely, Harry said. I have a starting point from Tuesday night. I know I can control its position in my mind. It stays when I tell it to. It quieted when I addressed it. That's a form of leverage. Now I need to understand the attachment points. I'll research it, she said immediately. There's almost no literature on Horcrux removal, but there might be something applicable in the broader magical theory of soul work. And Charles, Professor Xavier, will have psychic frameworks that might give us the technical architecture. She said us with the ease of someone who had decided, without making a production of it, that she was in. Harry looked at her. You know this isn't safe, he said. Researching soul magic from a library is completely safe, she said with the practical directness that was one of her best qualities. And Harry, she set the book in her lap down. You're my friend. You were my friend on the train before I knew anything about the scar. And you've been my friend every day since, without once making me feel like an outsider in a world I came to late. Whatever this is, I'm in it. She said it without drama or performance, just fact. Harry looked at the fire. He felt the shape of the statement settle in him without needing to examine it. All right, he said. Good, she said, and picked her book back up. I'll start with the theory sections of Magic Most Evil tomorrow. The restricted section has a copy. How are you getting into the restricted section? I'm going to ask Professor McGonagall, she said. With a sufficiently detailed academic justification. That's going to work, isn't it? It worked at my last school, she said. I see no reason to change the approach. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright over the Scottish Highlands, and Harry was on the Quidditch pitch at 7 o'clock because McGonagall had told him at the Thursday meeting that Oliver Wood, Gryffindor's Quidditch captain, had been asking whether first-years were eligible to try for the team under exceptional circumstances, and McGonagall had said she'd look into it. Harry had said he'd never played Quidditch. McGonagall had given him a look that communicated, I'm aware and I'm still looking into it. Oliver Wood was 17 and had the organized passion of someone who had found his vocation and was vigorously pursuing it. He put Harry on a broom, explained the seeker position with the focused clarity of someone who has explained it many times but doesn't mind explaining it again because it is important, and then released the snitch. The snitch was gold and winged and moved with the specific unpredictability of something that was designed to be nearly impossible to catch. Harry felt it leave Oliver's hand, felt its weight in the air, tiny and bright and moving at the edge of his spatial awareness. He was already moving before it had fully disappeared. He flew on instinct. The broom responded to intention the same way the stairs had responded to his hold mechanical magic interfacing with his broader spatial sense, and the combination was extraordinary. He was not fighting the broom. He was wearing it. The pitch opened up below him and he felt the whole volume of the air around the goalposts and the stands and the 100-foot space between them, and the snitch was a bright point in that volume, and he was already closing the distance before his conscious mind had processed the trajectory. He caught it in 10 seconds. Flat. Oliver Wood stared at him from across the pitch with his mouth open. Was that fast? Harry said. That, Oliver said in the voice of a man having a religious experience, was the fastest anyone has ever caught the training snitch in the history of this team, including 3 professional-level players who have since graduated. He looked at the snitch in Harry's hand. He looked at Harry. He looked at the sky as if requesting confirmation. You're on the team. I have one condition, Harry said. Anything, Oliver said immediately, with the reckless certainty of a man who had not heard the condition. I can't make every practice. My other school has training sessions. Harry looked at him. I'll make what I can and I'll make every match. Oliver thought about this for about 2 seconds. Can your training sessions improve your Quidditch? Everything I do improves everything else, Harry said honestly. Done, Oliver said. You're the seeker, please never get injured. On Sunday afternoon, Charles sat in a conjured chair in the middle of the Hogwarts grounds. Dumbledore had provided it without comment, in the way of someone who had updated his understanding of what accommodation looked like. And Harry sat on the grass beside him, and they did the thing they'd been building toward since Tuesday night. Harry went inward. Charles went with him, not leading, not driving, following Harry's awareness the way you follow a guide into their own territory. The psychic architecture of Harry's mind was as always extraordinary to move through, the vast clear space of it, the self-built walls and structures, the organized complexity of a mind that had been its own primary reference point for its entire existence. And there in the space Harry had identified, nested in the deeper architecture. The fragment. Charles felt it the way he felt everything, as psychic pressure, as information. But with Harry as the guide, he could see it clearly for the first time. Not the fragment alone, but the attachment points, the places where it had grown into Harry's psychic structure like a plant into soil, putting out roots over 9 years, becoming load-bearing in ways that made simple extraction dangerous. You see it, Harry said internally to Charles. Yes, Charles said, all of it. The roots are deeper than I expected, but not deeper than the architecture, Harry said. It grew into me, but the walls I built, they're older than the roots. They predate the roots. Which means they run underneath. Charles was quiet for a moment. He was following what Harry was describing, and he could see it. The self-built psychic structures that Harry had constructed since childhood ran below the fragment's attachment points like bedrock. The fragment had grown into the surface, not the foundation. If you brought the bedrock up, Charles said slowly, use the architecture to push from below rather than pulling from above, it would separate at the attachment points, Harry said, from the roots up. Clean if it's done carefully enough. That would require extraordinary control, Charles said. Holding the foundation stable while moving sections of it selectively, Harry, that's what I do when I hold a staircase still, Harry said. Or when I stop the spell in Diagon Alley. Different scale. Same principle. Charles was quiet. You think I can do it, Harry said. Not a question. I think Charles said that the only person in the world who could do this is the person who built the architecture it's sitting in. A pause. I also think we spend the next year understanding every millimeter of it before we attempt it. And I'll be present. And Dumbledore will be present. And this is a decision we make together completely with full information. Agreed, Harry said. All of that, they came back out. The afternoon was cold and clear and the ground smelled of autumn. Harry sat on the grass and looked at the lake. Charles sat in his conjured chair and looked at Harry. Next year, Charles said. Next year, Harry agreed. After we've destroyed the other Horcruxes, so there's nothing for the fragment to run back to. Dumbledore has leads on 3 of the others already, Charles said. He's been working toward this for years. And now he doesn't have to do it alone, Harry said. And the piece he was dreading, the last part, has a solution that doesn't require what he thought it required. Charles looked at him. How are you? He said. Not about the plan, about Harry. Harry thought about it. He thought about the train and Hermione with her book, and Ron and his straightforward acceptance, and Logan on the pitch 2 days ago teaching himself to navigate the moving staircases by the simple expedient of refusing to be confused by them. He thought about the compass and what it pointed to, and the castle around him that knew he was there, and the fragment in his head that had tried to contact its source and found Harry Potter standing between them. I'm good, he said. And meant it in the fullest sense of the word. Not fine, not managing, good, as in, the thing I am is what I'm supposed to be and I'm where I should be and the people I need are in my corner. Good, Charles said. He looked at the lake. A giant squid somewhere beneath its surface was doing something that generated a small wave. Logan wants to know if you can come home for half-term. I was already planning to, Harry said. He'll pretend he didn't ask, Charles said. I know, Harry said. Tell him I'm coming. The Sunday afternoon went on around them in its mild Scottish way. Unhurried and without spectacle. 2 people sitting in companionable quiet on the grounds of an 800-year-old school, thinking about the same problem from adjacent angles and finding, as they generally did, that the view from adjacent angles was more complete than the view from any single position. Inside the castle, Hermione was in the library with 3 books open simultaneously and a 4th on its way off the shelf. In the common room, Ron was playing chess and explaining the strategic principles to Neville, who was losing in good humor. In the dungeons, Snape was doing something solitary and complex with ingredients that required precision. And somewhere underneath the precise movements of his hands was the ongoing business of a man deciding what to do with an old grief that had just walked into his classroom wearing its mother's eyes, and answered every question correctly. In the Slytherin dormitory, Draco Malfoy was writing a letter to his father that had been started, stopped, restarted, and was now on its 4th draft. Because the first 3 had described Harry Potter in terms that his father would approve of and that Draco was finding, with some discomfort, he was no longer sure were accurate. And in his office, Albus Dumbledore sat with Fawkes on his shoulder and a cup of tea going cold on his desk, and he was doing what he did best and worst, thinking 10 steps ahead. Except now the shape of the future was different. The terrible fixed point he'd been building toward for a decade had shifted, and in its place was something he hadn't dared to plan for because it had required a version of Harry that he hadn't known to expect. A version of Harry that had grown up somewhere else first. That had been found by someone who saw him before the world's idea of him had calcified. That had arrived at Hogwarts already knowing his own mind, already in possession of his own power, already a person, Dumbledore thought. Not a piece on the board, a person. He was going to have to entirely rethink his chess metaphors. Outside the castle windows, the October evening settled over the grounds with the particular Scottish finality of a night that means business. And Harry Potter walked back toward the warmth and light of the castle he was learning to call a second home, with the compass in his pocket pointing steadily forward. and the fragment in his scar sitting quietly in the architecture it had chosen to inhabit, and the shape of the next several years stretching out ahead, complicated, demanding, and genuinely deeply his. He was not afraid of any of it, he never had been, he simply finally had people to be brave alongside. And that, it turned out, was the whole difference.